We wanted to make an ultimate video on every Saints Row Easter egg across the entire franchise history, and there's so much across all of Saints Row that the video ended up being 2 hours long. And I guarantee you there's some Easter eggs you've never seen before, especially because most Saints Row games released on the Xbox 360 and PS3 era, and the textures were compressed so much for whatever resolution you were playing at back in the day. Now that things are upscaled for current generation hardware, there's little details we never noticed originally that we can only see nowadays. This video does have chapters if you want to skip to your favorite Saints Row game, but don't worry, through and through, this is a wild ride. Let's start with some Easter eggs though that span the entire series that pop up in multiple games. Now, if you're a long-term Saints Row fan, you might be familiar with the famous 31 theory, which has existed across pretty much every Saints Row game. It's a pretty simple ongoing Easter egg where if you pay attention, you'll notice the recurring number 31 appear in a lot of different places. Sometimes it's the number 13, but just a lot of times 3 and 1 are paired together in just weird instances. What's interesting though is not a lot of people realize this was an ongoing Easter egg until later on when Saints Row the Third released, and there's like a line of dialogue between Kinsey and Josh through like the homie conversation system that they had in that game, and she essentially mentions her 31 theory.
You know, at first I thought that Nightblade was a media trick trying to obfuscate the reality of our vampire problem.
Yeah, I don't think that was a...
Then I realized it was just a vampire show.
That's a relief.
And that's when I realized it was because it fell perfectly into the 31 theory.
What?
The 31 theory. Anything important is always connected to a 31.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
With this dialogue added in Saints Row Third, this kind of opened up the rabbit hole for a lot of Saints Row fans to go back to older games and find a ton of references to 31, along with future Saints Row games also having the number 31. In the Saints Row 1 mission, All the King's Men, Anya's code to the King penthouse is 3131.
Okay. The code is 3131. Please don't hurt Stefan.
Also, if you look at the shoeboxes in the King penthouse, they all have the shoebox size 13. The true skill ranking for hitting Kingpin is 31 wins. There's also 31 single-player achievements in the first Saints Row. In Saints Row 2, if you do the activity Crowd Control, this cutscene mentions the number 31.
Bukkake High School 31, starring Abby Hammerstein.
Saints Row 2 had the Sons of Samedi storyline, and if you did the 10th mission of that storyline, you would get the mission Assault on Precinct 31. How long was Gat in jail for?
2 years and 31 days.
If you're doing the Hitman quests, the target, Tim, says that he is a fireman, and he thinks that he's seen an arsonist light 31 different buildings on fire. If you look over at the game customization options, there's 31 different compliments and taunts. The news channel is News 13. The number on Pierce's jersey is 13. And if you look at the commercials on the television for Rusty's Needle, the reason to stop at Rusty's Needle, number 31, the feed dogs.
Reason to shop at Rusty's Needle number 31, the feed dogs.
Saints Row 3 had the whole Horde mode that they introduced, and there's a level called 31 Days Later. Murder Brawl 31 is occurring. It's advertised all over the place. In this closing cutscene for the level A Remote Chance, Killbane will actually mention how he had to defend his world title 13 times in one night.
The best is defending the world title 13 times in one night.
In the text adventure Dragons and Tears, there's this mention to praying to the 31 gods of Diaz that your torch won't go out. The code to the elevator in Party Time is 3131. If you listen to the radio, you can actually hear a commercial for Saints Flow, and there's a mention of going on a 13-day murder bender.
You need energy, and you need it now. Want to rob a bank? Cut your own music demo? Go on a Johnny Gat-inspired 13-day murder bender?
There's another radio commercial for Dragons and Tears that mentions stabbing an orc 31 times.
The gameplay is all in your fucking mind, dude. You want to do a 31-hit melee combo? Just type that you stabbed the orc 31 times. It is the future of gaming.
The little stinger scene that they did at the end of Saints Row 3 where they're getting ready to do the whole gangsters in space thing, it says that they're on take 31. There's also like 2 fictional shows, Lowdown and I Want to Sleep with Shandi, and they both air on Channel 31.
Tune in to Lowdown to find out. Only on Channel 31.
And since in Saints Row 3, Gat is presumed dead, the Saints Row website lists his birth year as 1980 and his death year as 2011, the year the game came out, meaning that the character was 31 years old when he died. I actually found a reference myself when I was getting footage for this, where on the storefront you can just carefully see 113 for the store number. At the very end of the mission, A Pleasant Day, Zinyak refers to Virtual Steelport as Simulation 31. The transfer body code is 1331. Kinsey mentions in an audio log that the planetary defense program that she had pitched and planned only cost $3.1 billion.
For my planetary defense system, we wouldn't be stuck up here dealing with the Zin. I mean, it would only have cost $3.1 billion.
There's a clip of Shanti talking about driving down a freeway with Matt Miller on the roof of the car at 131 miles an hour.
The one where the pissed off ex-gang member gets a dog for a partner, so she straps it to the roof of the cop car and drives down the freeway at 131 miles per hour?
Zinyak refers to the player as Special Prisoner 31, and the 6th player customization preset mentions the 31st Amendment. Interestingly enough, when it came to Saints Row Gat Out of Hell, there isn't a lot of documentation online regarding the 31 Easter egg, though while we definitely utilized and appreciated the Saints Row fandom wiki for documenting some of these cases we didn't know about, we decided to take matters in our own hands for trying to find more references like this in Saints Row Gat Out of Hell, because I just feel like maybe someone didn't document some stuff. And we did find this building in the background that just straight up has the number 13 on it. Ultor Corporation is a very easy one. They kind of start out as like a little background company in Saints Row 1, but they have a much bigger role from Saints Row 2 forward, and they show up all over the place. Ultor Corp, though, actually stems from the Red Faction series, another game series that Volition had worked on. They're like a Mars mining company. And while it's clear the universes are not directly connected, they've made statements about that in the past, it is really cool to see how a little homage ended up becoming a major plot point in the Saints Row universe. I wasn't 100% sure if this counts as a full-on Easter egg, but we're going to count it anyways. But in every single Saints Row game from the very beginning, or at least every mainline game, there is a speech that is usually given by the leader of the Saints, and it always ends with the same phrase. This happens in every Saints Row game with the exception of Gat Out of Hell, which was standalone DLC, and it even shows up in the reboot. Take a listen.
It's our time now. Let's get this started.
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 There is another Easter egg, though, that spans multiple different Saints Row games, and that is the infamous Cabbit. It's this bunny-cat crossover, which started out in Saints Row 2 in a really, really unique way. So there's these secret islands, like, way out of Stillwater that we're going to talk about because they kind of have their own Easter eggs in their own right when we focus more on Saints Row 2. But if you travel to one of the islands, you'll notice just, like, a mysterious arrow kind of pointing you in a general direction. We ended up finding this randomly one day when we were getting footage for Saints Row 2, and we followed it, and sure enough, we found this weird island that had all these other arrows, and when we walked around on it, boom, we fell in the water, and then a giant rabbit started coming out. But it wasn't just any rabbit, it was Cabbit, a part cat, part rabbit, and just something so random out here, and it's just really cool to see this in a Saints Row 2 game. So of course, when Saints Row 3 or Saints Row the 3rd would roll around, he decided to reuse this Easter egg in a completely new way, or a new dedication. There are a couple of small little stuffed Cabbits that you can find in various locations, but there is a giant Cabbit that's over by a ship that, like, apparently was fished out of the sea. And it would make sense if this is the same Cabbit from Saints Row 2, but now here in Steelport. Actually, if you go to Kinsey's warehouse in Saints Row the 3rd, you can find a newspaper clipping referencing a hidden bunny in the ocean, which is a reference to the Saints Row 2 Easter egg, but obviously it's, you know, building out some lore about it here. Also, in Gangstas in Space, Cabbits show up kind of all over the place. And in Saints Row 4, we see even more Cabbits everywhere this time. They just kind of become this recurring little smaller Easter egg that just kind of sprinkled all throughout Saints Row 4. If you go to the suburbs in Johnny Gat's simulation specifically in Saints Row 4, you can actually see a bunch of Cabbits kind of by this tree randomly. A little bit interesting, right? I mean, there's a lot of Cabbits in Johnny Gat's simulation for whatever reason. Maybe they haunt him. I don't know. You can also find hidden Cabbits occasionally when playing through Gat Out of Hell as well, since Gat Out of Hell mostly uses the same sandbox items from Saints Row 4 and Saints Row the 3rd. It makes sense that this would be another item kind of just sprinkled throughout, so you can find them from time to time. What I didn't expect, though, was Cabbits to continue to be used past Saints Row 4, wherein Agents of Mayhem, which technically exists in the Saints Row universe, has this whole achievement arc tied to a Cabbit, where you follow a holographic Cabbit, and it's like a whole little thing. It's also worth noting there's an ability in the game called a Cabbit Bomb. And then, even though this is a full reboot, in Saints Row, the reboot, the one that, you know, closed down down Volition. There is another secret Cabbit Easter egg where in one of these like storage locker spaces, you can see a pretty large Cabbit. Not the biggest Cabbit we've ever seen, but bigger than the other Cabbits here. And it's just kind of chilling here in storage. So let's start things off with the very first Saints Row game, Saints Row, which released August 29th, 2006 on the Xbox 360, developed by Volition and published by THQ. Interestingly enough, it was announced to release on the PlayStation 3 as well as the Xbox 360. However, if you're a PlayStation 3 player, you might have noticed that never actually happened. This game was an Xbox 360 exclusive, and it was very successful, probably because there wasn't a Grand Theft Auto game that had released on the Xbox 360 console yet, so people looking for a game like that to play on their console had to find an alternative, and Saints Row kind of fit the bill, even if it was a little more comedic in tone. That ended up benefiting the game, as there's a bunch of Easter eggs associated with this kind of tonal shift away from the more serious nature of Grand Theft Auto. And while really not an Easter egg, these early Saints Row games actually had a multiplayer, and I do think it's funny how the whole system just works in general. There's 4 multiplayer game types: Gangsta Brawl, Big Ass Chains, Blinged Out Ride, and Protect the Pimp. What are these names for games? Also, much how games like Halo 2 had a clan system, this game had a gang system, and there was like different gangs that you could join through the menus. There was gang stats and gang leaderboards and like a whole gang ranked system. It's actually incredible. There was also a regular multiplayer rank system that even used true skill-based matchmaking, and the ranks in that were Thug, Killa, Gangsta, and Kingpin. So yeah, with Saints Row 1 being a success, selling over 1 million copies, Saints Row 2 was greenlit to be the follow-up game that would release in 2008, but it seemed like they were pretty confident Saints Row would have been successful because development actually started in 2005, a year before the first Saints Row game even released. So Saints Row 1 has a couple of really interesting things that we have to talk about before we jump into the ones that have a lot of Easter eggs like Saints Row 2 and Saints Row 3. If you head over to the Lopez Mansion, there's this locked room that has a teddy bear that's randomly full of money. Now to open the door, you have to use like an explosion, and the bear will end up breaking if it gets shot, but it's somehow, indestructible to explosions. But yeah, look at that money. There's a few buildings that you can run into that you might see on the sides called Chuck Niuk's Books, which is a reference to Chuck Palahniuk, who's the author of Fight Club. There is like an Easter egg secret stash area that if you do a couple of specific things, you can end up getting super strength while also being permanently on fire. You first have to get the Pimp Cane, which you can only get by using the Pimp Cane cheat code. You have to then head to Sloppy Seconds, which is one of the clothing stores, and start a theft, but it has to be the specific one that's in the Saints Row district. Then you have to enter the safe code backwards without letting the joystick like reset in the center. Then you have to leave the safe cracking part by hitting down on the D-pad twice, and then you exit the store through the door, and this unlock screen will pop up, and boom. Why is this the steps to do this? I don't know, but it is something interesting. There's a few weird nuances about this Easter egg too. Like, for instance, you can earn the Pimp Cane legitimately without using cheat codes, but the only way you can get this Easter egg to activate is if you use a Pimp Cane that was acquired through cheating. Now, for this video, we did a huge deep dive into all of the small little details in Saints Row 1 and in every Saints Row that we talk about in this video, and some of the little details are reused and carried over into multiple Saints Row games. So sometimes one of these little details might have actually started in Saints Row 1, but we might not talk about it until we noticed it in Saints Row 2. But don't worry, I think we did a really good job at covering almost every little interesting nuanced Easter egg that we could find. Like, for instance, there's this pretty dark Easter egg. There's a hotline number here with a word that we can't say for video, but it's definitely spun at a completely different angle than what a hotline like this would actually normally do. And that alone is already dark, somewhat fitting for the Saints Row universe, but this Easter egg takes things a whole nother step further. You can sometimes run into jumpers in Saints Row 1, people who are either standing at a cliff or a bridge and they're going to jump, and they'll say a random line sometimes before they jump, which meant that even more effort was put into like designing this whole thing, and it's a little wild. Here are some lines that are archived on the Saints Row fandom wiki page, and they are lines. Here they are.
I can't take writing all these persona lines.
Judges, get your scorecards ready.
Also, if you pull out your phone and you call 1555, it's over, which is the number from that poster we looked at earlier. This is what you hear. Jesus Christ. Saints Row 1 did establish a lot of things that would continue to be reused in later Saints Row games. Like, for instance, the place where you would get your car upgraded in Saints Row 1 was called Rim Jobs, something that would exist through most main Saints Row games. A lot of these places actually have phone numbers that you can call, and if you call them in-game, you'll get like a pretty funny voice line, like a voicemail box intro.
You've reached Rim Jobs, custom auto details and accessories. We can't get to the phone right now, either because we're closed or because we're too busy. If you... Hey! Those clothes are for you as nephew. You can't be selling that. Do you see a damn price tag? Hey, just put it down and get back in the shop, man. I'm doing some here. Jesus! If you want to come in during our normal hours, we can get you hooked up with our full selection of bodywork, rims, effects, motion, whatever it takes to pimp out that POS right. Later!
There's some other places that have popped up in other Saints Row games besides just Saints Row 1 that started here, like On the Rag clothing.
Hey, Marge here. Thanks for calling On the Rag. We're out fighting the war against slaughterhouses that produce so-called fashionable leathers and furs. And let me tell you, there's nothing fashionable about wearing the bloodied skin of innocent creatures. So please stop by during our regular store hours, and we'll be happy to assist you in selecting non-harmful, ecologically sound fashion that doesn't encourage the murder of our woodland friends. Peace.
There's a restaurant chain called Lick-a-Chick.
Thanks for calling your local Lick-a-Chick Chicken, home of the F***it Bucket. We're too busy frying up the tastiest chicken parts around to take your call right now, but feel free to come on in and order up a meal. And all this week, don't forget about the family F***it special. That's 2 F***it buckets, 2 big biscuits, and a 2-liter bottle of chunky cola, all for just $12. Why, that's a F***it bucket deal for the whole chick-licking family. Hope to see you all in here soon. Oh, and leave a message.
A coffee restaurant called Grounds for Divorce.
Thank you for calling Grounds for Divorce Coffee Cafe. We're either closed or we're busy brewing hot, steaming cups of coffee for our guests. Visitation is welcome during our regular hours, so why put it off? Come on in and take custody of some delicious chocolate scones and our famous tall espresso that's guaranteed to keep you awake at night. The coffee runs hot and the half and half is always cold at Grounds for Divorce. Beep.
And then Eye for an Eye Voodoo.
You have reached Eye for an Eye Voodoo Supply. The forces around us are keeping us busy and unable to answer the phone. After all, the land of the living and the realm of the dead are always connected. Should you experience a tragic loss, don't hesitate to call, and we'll see how the spirits receive you.
Oh, and we can't forget Big Willie's Cab, the taxi cab service.
Hey, you want to ride our Big Willie? We'll be right there.
There are some other little unlockable things or secret things that you can find that are like Easter eggs. Like you can call Chicken Ned, and if you get his phone number, you can find on the side of like a strip club or something. You end up getting Chicken Ned as like a homie. There's a store over here where you can actually buy used vehicles that don't have VIN numbers, and that's insane. But it's funny because their little slogan is "It's a steal," because the car probably is literally stolen. Of course, the Volition logo, the development studio that made this game, will pop up in various different places. Like here is the Volition logo on a shirt at Sloppy Seconds. We found this sign that says Soul Eater. And there were some interesting things that we saw at this movie theater, surprisingly enough, besides the whole like and eat concession stand that they got going on here. There's some interesting things going on. There's this movie that looks like a plumber movie of some sorts. What are these movie theater items, by the way? Damp popcorn? Some of the other snacks that they have available don't sound that great either. Some of these movies also that we have here that are advertised will show up in other Saints Row games down the road, so just like keep them in the back of your head. I found this Volition branded whiskey sign that I thought was neat, and there was this sign advertising Estrogen beer. On this back locker, I found a sticker with the Volition logo on here as well. I found a sign for like, I don't know, like a legal service or something, and it says "We spell justice" with a dollar sign. And I just thought that that's like a crazy catchphrase. Okay, then I found a sex shop or something, I guess is what this is in Saints Row. And they got some movies of their own that are questionable. Mortal Kombat 2, crazy title. Bubbles the Porn Fiend, also, what? You know, even since the early Saints Row games, there was always like this little tread on like fantasy sci-fi beyond what we would later see in later Saints Row games that, you know, people maybe were more critical about Saints Row with. But even all the way back in the first Saints Row game, if you ended up calling Eye for an Eye Voodoo, after you finish the West Side Rollers mission, you can unlock the character Lynn coming back from her death, but this time as a zombie. And as we know, zombies end up being like a recurring thing in Saints Row across the board. So they weren't afraid to do some interesting things. This also kind of points out like the whole like voodoo thing, which plays a little bit of a bigger role at the end of Saints Row 2 when you are fighting like the leader of the Sons of Samedi. You might remember the whole like voodoo aspect at the end and your character's like, what the hell is going on here? Also, I decided to check out Thunder Pump, the gas station brand in the Saints Row universe. It's in pretty much every Saints Row, but this one has a special deal for your car that's only $69. It's the funny number. Obviously, another like meme location is the tattoo parlor called Rusty Needle. Solid name picking there. Also, while I was out and about, I found this poster for an upcoming movie called Killer Dolphin. That sounds terrifying. I've had a phobia of dolphins for a very long time, and most people aren't going to get that reference. There's a reference called Fishy Joe's. This one was interesting. You can barely see it upscaled here, but if you look very, very closely, you can see they have a Killer Dolphin special, which is wild. Also, this like little disclaimer down here. It says like all foods contain gen manipulated species because nature isn't tasty enough. The swordfish at the top also says taste me. I found a sign for a beer brand or an IPA brand called Ass IPA and another beer location or beer sign that said Kink Beer. What? This next one surprised me, but I found another poster for another upcoming movie, this time called Killer Dolphin 2. I was really surprised that this one is already in the works, but looks like this one will have some sort of twist. Maybe there's multiple dolphins or children of the dolphins involved. I found this store that has a 0% off sale going on, so wonderful. What is this? Another dolphin movie? We're already at Killer Dolphin 3, and this one is like I don't know what this even says. Does it say the Mecha Dolphin of Doom? Okay. If you take a gander over in this direction, you can see this pizza restaurant over here, and it says, all you can eat pizza. Eat until you burst. It's also damn tasty, apparently. There is the Saints Row universe's version of UPS, I guess, and their motto here is big package shipping, and we need to know that they come faster. Inside this warehouse, I was pretty happy to find a couple of other little points of interest along the way. There's this safety sign that says, safety is for suckers, work fast or go home hungry. There's this warning sign that says, warning, closed circuit video cameras on premises. You best not try a goddamn thing. Smile, we're watching you. And if that's not a reassuring workplace sign, then I don't know what possibly is. Also, there's this sign saying drunk forklift operator present. I mean, yeah, it's something to look out for, I guess. At least they put a sign up for their employees. Interestingly enough, Saints Row was originally supposed to have a forklift as a drivable vehicle. It's been uncovered in like cut content, though it never actually made its way into the main release of the game. So who knows? Maybe there was like a mini game at one point where you were a drunk forklift driver, or just there was a forklift you could drive. That would have been cool too. Saints Row 1 also introduces a restaurant called Freckle Bitches, which will play a bigger role in the larger Saints Row universe, surprisingly, believe it or not. But nonetheless, I decided to take a closer look here, and the menu was a little bit interesting. So they got the Fist, the Twins, you get Chicken Bazooms, and the Big Swallow. A very interesting menu to say the least. A little bit overpriced, I would say. I mean, these prices are kind of a bit outrageous, especially since this is 2006. This is you know, before like all the massive inflation that we run into nowadays has happened. Also, this sign over here says, you can't beat our meat special, which is, you know, something that they decided to sprinkle in there for a little bit of extra edginess for Saints Row 1. I don't know, Saints Row 1 was totally chill with just putting in some jokes, even if they're a little bit out there. And I think maybe that's why some of the criticism comes around for the newer Saints Row game that had come out, the Reboot, because it played it very, very safe in some regards, and then tried to still be edgy funny, but it just didn't land the same way. We did end up playing around in the multiplayer mode, where we hosted a private lobby for us to check around and see what we could find. Saints Row 1 did have some unique things going on in the multiplayer mode. Some things that are maybe duplicated from various places in the main campaign, but we found them in the multiplayer mode. There was this sign that said, "We sacrificed safety so you can get the lowest price guaranteed." You know, just what you want to hear by a major airliner. This is going to be found in the airport mission that you can do in co-op mode. We did find this sign, and no, that's not some Russian company or Russian location. It's just Volition spelled backwards. I found this sign for something called Global Porn Babes on Tour Part 4 Europe Penetrations. I don't know what that is. There's an edible underwear emporium also located in Stillwater, at least back in the Saints Row 1 era of time. Also, I was playing through the campaign when you go through the abandoned police station, and I made my way down to the bottom floor where you don't normally have to go, and there's these holding cells, and inside one of these back holding cells, those words, "D's nuts was here," is spray painted on the wall, which definitely predates like that meme kind of going viral. I mean, it was definitely a joke that existed long before, but definitely way ahead of its time for a Saints Row type joke. Kind of impressive. Also, if you go into On the Rag, there's a bunch of signs everywhere that they have dolphin-friendly products. Another weird reference to dolphins popping up yet again in Saints Row 1, and we still don't fully understand why they keep popping up so much. And then there's also this other sign of saving the sheep. When Luke and I were running around looking for different things to find for the Saints Row 1 section of this video, I did find something kind of interesting inside of one of the clothing stores. If you go into one of the changing rooms, there is a pretty peculiar sign here, kind of reminding people not to shoplift because, you know, you'll get shot. Also, while I was driving around, I found this random sign over here that is letting us know that old Stinky was here. Don't know who Stinky was or why he's here, but he let us know for sure. Also, there was a truck that drove by, you know, advertising that they have tough tools for hard men. Whatever that means. This time around, though, with Saints Row 2, it would not be an Xbox 360 exclusive. There would be a release for the PlayStation 3 and a PC release of the game, because games for Windows always worked well, though the PC version was ported over by CD Projekt, and there were plans for other ports of Saints Row 2, like for the PSP, and I think there was even a version of Saints Row 2 being worked on for the Wii at one point. Nonetheless, Saints Row 2 was my introduction to the series, and there are so many little things, little Easter eggs and details in this game. It's really special. If you liked Saints Row 3 and you hadn't played Saints Row 2, while the controls might be a little bit weird, the game is definitely worth looking back at, and while we were getting footage for this, we realized how well Saints Row 2 holds up to this day. The year Saints Row 2 released, sales were actually slightly under what was expected, and also reported a loss of $431 million, though Saints Row 2 sales totaled in $2.8 million at the time. It definitely had thicker competition in 2008 going head-to-head with Grand Theft Auto 4, but ultimately, I think Saints Row ended up persevering because by 2010, the game had already sold over 3.4 million with a franchise total of over 6 million, making it one of the best-selling video game franchises at that time. Now, of course, earlier in the video, we talked about the little, like, secret Cabbit Easter egg that would pop up. But out in the oceans of Saints Row 2, there are some other interesting Easter eggs. Like, for instance, there's this secret oasis way, way, way out of bounds that if you go to, it's like this cool, like, watery area, and there's, like, these statues and whatnot. A really cool, like, just random secret. There's also this, like, spine of some sort of creature that may have landed on this island before us and, had an untimely demise and or death. It looks cool though. But also, if you go to the island next to it, it's like this weirdly shaped, destroyed type structure. I don't know. Is this what's left of Atlantis? There's this other building that's like half underwater you can even stand on. Just something kind of interesting that's thrown in here. That's not the only thing that's like going on though out in the ocean in this game. There is like a secret sea monster that swims around and you have to kind of, I don't know, catch it at the right time, but at the same time, the sea monster can't really be interacted with. It won't eat you or anything, and you can't kill it. It just does its own little thing, swims around a bit, and then that's it. This next one's one of my favorite ones, but you can actually find a secret Volition game design studio in Saints Row 2. If you head over to the North Shore Marina District, there's this building, it has all these like shops on it, and if you climb up like these stairs here, you can find a way into this building, and it has a huge tunnel, and it's kind of like right on top of where the big mall is in Saints Saints Row 2. But nonetheless, you make your way up inside this building and you can find this little like office room where I guess they developed Saints Row games. I mean, not really, but it is cool that they put like a little secret development studio room all the way up here. And it's a pretty cool little place to have a dev studio like right by the water and whatnot. Very nice. If you head back over to the cemetery and look at the gravestones, you can actually see some of the names on the headstones are Volition developers. The names will match up with people who worked on Saints Row 2. If you go to the Chinese restaurant, it's named Fukyu Fukmi, which is a reference to the Austin Powers characters Fukyu and Fukmi. But on the menu itself, you can buy an item called Some Young Guy, which is a reference to the movie Wayne's World.
I'll have the cream of Some Young Guy.
If you go and you complete the Amberbrook Museum Pier Stronghold, at the end of the Stronghold, it always like posts you like a little like newspaper article like as to what's going on in like the overall world of Saints Row. And this time the title for the article is This Is Madness, which is near like a gladiator type museum, which is a reference to the movie 300. If you're in the projects district, you can find this storage company and they have like this Chinese architectural entrance to it. But the company's name is Noidalov Storage, which if you look at it and you read it backwards, it's Volition, the development studio. If you go to this building in the Arena District, you can see this storefront and it has a bunch of jerseys on display. If you look closer at the jerseys themselves, you may notice that there's some names that you can actually read on the back of the jerseys, and all of these names are the names of more developers who worked at Volition. If you listen to Ultor FM enough, occasionally you will hear like a little advertisement played between songs and it's like a reporter talking about some weird things going on, and they keep talking about how absurd it is to see a zombie dressed as a West Side Roller, which is actually an homage to the Saints Row 1 Easter egg that we talked about earlier when you could get Zombie Lynn as a homie. There's an airplane called a Snipes 57, which is a reference to the movie Passenger 57, where Wesley Snipes plays the Passenger 57. So it's called the Snipes 57. The golf carts in Saints Row 2 are called Knoxvilles, which are likely a reference to Johnny Knoxville. Also, if you complete the Demolition Derby at Stillwater University, you can unlock special derbies. One of them is called the Jackass Derby, and you get to drive golf carts called Knoxvilles. Much like how in Saints Row 1 you could get a zombie homie, in Saints Row 2 you can do that too if you call an eye for an eye and you've completed the mission where, you know, Carlos gets to go on a little fun truck ride. You can get Carlos as a zombie homie. There's some fight clubs that happen in the prison and arena, and if you beat both of them, you get an achievement called Don't Talk About It, which is a reference to Fight Club. If you head back over to the prison area from the beginning of the game, you can find a door that says Stillwater Correctional, and if you go into the holding area, there's like a little restricted zone, and you can find a t-shirt that has the Volition logo on it. I think this truck is supposed to be like the Toyota equivalent, but in this universe, it's called Wasabi. There's quite a few interesting stores you can find in Saints Row 2 as well, so we'll just go through some of them pretty quickly here. There's Mama Payne's Crawfish, which Payne is one of the developers who worked on Saints Row. There's Red Square here, which is like an area that is obviously inspired by the Red Faction series. The ice cream thing here might be one of the most cursed ones out of all of these. If you know, you know. This is 2 scoops, 1 cup. What a great ice cream name. We found Lick-a-Chick again from Saints Row 1, but here it is in Saints Row 2. It's beak smacking good, apparently. Here's a turbulence sign, which also was in Saints Row 1, but it might be too suggestive with the airplanes here that we might need to censor it. In the mall section, there's a Sloppy Seconds again. Here's Peckerwood and Winery. Also, can we just talk about for a second how the mall itself is called Rounds Square? Like, okay. Freckle Bitches continues with their little motto of "You can't beat our meat." There's Max Air, where their whole line is "We will not let you down." Well, I hope not. We found this store called Home Skillet. There's D-Mart. Is this a reference to Kmart? I don't know. There's this massage parlor called Happy Ending Massage. We found another company called Payne & Co. Once again, that Payne name from the developer. We found this, which is a reference to the game Company of Heroes. Is this place really called Fortune Nookie? Like, we're that on the nose. Then we have the Live Internet Store. This place is called Technically Legal, which must be Dr. Disrespect's favorite store. We found a bookstore called Red Fiction, which is a reference to, once again, Red Faction. A hardware store called Hammered and Nailed. This place is just called straight up ribs for her pleasure and just the tip. There's the freckled menu here, which, you know, obviously interesting, similar to the first Saints Row game. We got the same ones popping up again, like rim jobs. There's a radio station called Classic 103.4, and you can hear their like little catchphrases, "We got beat up in school."
Classic 102.4. We got beat up in school too.
Also, some of the stores will have the name Camden on it, which is another reference to a Saints Row developer. And then this was one that we found in both Saints Row 1 and Saints Row 2. But if you look closely at some of the little like soda dispensers, one of the flavors is rotting juice and orange beans, which, what? I think it's also worth noting that the cemetery is called Morning Wood. There's this other liquor store, with like a cat theme. If you hear the Impressions phone number and you call it, it'll play this.
Hello, and thank you for calling Impressions. The mandates for shopping in our store are as follows. Females, no larger than size 2. Men, no waist larger than 32. Income, no less than 6 figures. Children, not allowed. They disgust me. We're at the height of haute couture. Don't waste our time.
There's also this statue that kind of looks like it's pissing. We found an interesting eulogy for Julius and a company called Deep Throat Industries. Also, inside of the hospital, there are some very interesting posters that I don't think many people probably were able to read back in the day on their like Xbox 360s or PlayStation 3s. And now we can actually see them because we have the game like playable on the Xbox Series X and it's like upscaled. But yeah, look at these little posters. Just to mix it up, I'm going to have Luke read the posters to you.
Please no singing, dancing, roller skating, smoking, or fishing. Please be considerate of the really old people dying in the rooms coming up. They've been around a long time and deserve to rest in peace as they depart to another place. We frankly don't care where they go as long as their kids pay the bill. Stillwater Nursing Program offers a second chance for former escorts, truck users, and ladies of the night. With competitive pay and excellent benefits, we can make you a professional and not just a professional escort. The professional staff at SMH can service all medical practices and needs for Stillwater. We strive to reach the highest level of service for our patients. At MSCs, we care cause you have cash. Our goal at MSH is to get you in and out as fast as possible and charge your insurance company as much as we can. Oh, we will also hit you with a ridiculous copay on the way out. We promise to provide you with the bare minimum of service with the maximum fees.
Also in Saints Row 2, we found this company called Frank in Peter Slow Packed Fudge Cakes. I wonder how successful their business is. We found this tank, it's like a sewage tank or something that says Returd It Tank. I don't know what this sign is supposed to mean, but party in my tummy so yummy, okay? And there's a restaurant here called Chop Suey. I wonder if they're a fan of that song. Here's one that Luke found when we were playing. Fresh Sushi Weekly. That's definitely the best type of sushi. You know, that's fresh at least once a week. And then we also found Mama Childress Shortbread Cookies. It's like this huge factory or company, something that's going on here, which is likely a developer reference. We found inside of the airport a little CD stand, and there's one CD called Oops, I Farted Again, which is probably a reference to the Britney Spears song Oops, I Did It Again. Also, when we were playing Saints Row 2, we're driving around trying to get footage of various things, and we found this one location, and I don't know what's going on here. There's a bunch of coffins everywhere. Apparently, this service is called Crazy Eddie's End of the Road Discount Coffins. Hey, I mean, a deal's a deal, right? Also, what in the redneck is this, like, serpent thing that's made out of dismantled cars? Like what am I looking at here? There is this adorable looking spider though, so I'll give him some artistic credit. Okay, so this one is kind of funny but also really creepy. If you head over to the Morning Woods Cemetery, there's, I guess, what is called by the community as a sex cavern, which is a little bit of an interesting place. There's these blow up inflatable swimming floaties. That's the terminology we're going to be using for this video. There's some coffins and bottles of alcohol. This is kind of like a little underground area. There's two different entrances you can go through, but the main way you can find it is if you go to this water tower in the northwest area of Elysian Fields Trailer Park. And while the entrance is a little hard to notice because it's covered, you can find this opening to shoot these barrels to make it easier. The other entrance is like a crypt that has the label Hawk on it, and there's like a large hole here that leads to the underground tunnels. But yeah, look at this. This is a creepy area. We have these things. There's like a hammer, there's cinder blocks, there's these heads mounted on the wall. What is going on over here? Like, this is just like nightmare fuel, I think. Also, there's this like coffin here, and this one is labeled as Mike, which a lot of people early on back in the day thought that this was like a play on words. You know, it's in the Hawk crypt, and there's a coffin named Mike, meaning that the character's name could be Mike Hawk. Ooh, funny Xbox gamer tag level joke. But what it turns out to actually be is that there was a senior associate producer with the name Mike Hawkins, and it was like a little, you know, homage to him, and probably a play on it at the same time.
I want to say it's this guy here.
North?
Yep.
Northeast corner of the...
I don't know why I'm floating, but you go down through here, past the blah blah blah, sex doll cave.
The baiting room.
Was this something we had to cut from the...
No, we didn't have to cut this. I think it was from like Australia or something.
We cut something.
I don't know, dude.
We cut a lot of stuff from Australia and Germany.
That sex doll is trying to get warm.
Look, here's some more embedded in the wall.
Like, what kind of story did we try to tell with
is that
this?
A skull? Yes. It's two sex
Somebody
doll
died. They had too much...
Skull.
Is he like... What's this one? The sex doll's tied up, and there's cinder blocks.
Cemetery sex cavern found.
Congratulations. Did you get a Chivo for that?
Achievement unlocked.
Oh, yeah.
Now, to be fair, while that last one was a cool Easter egg, it is just a part of the bigger secret areas objective quest line that Saints Row 2 kind of had. There were a lot of secret areas hidden all over, but honestly, most of these secret areas were, in a way, filled with something unique and Easter egg-like in one way or another. So if you haven't played Saints Row in a while, definitely recommend going back and maybe doing this for the collection purposes, because there are some interesting things you can find along the way. Here are some of the interesting things that we found when we started going through all of them. There is this secret area that you can find over here where there's like a skull cave. If you look at it from this huge pirate ship that's also randomly just parked up in the north area of the Saints Row 2 Stillwater area, you can just like see it over here. You can go inside it. It's a cave. There's not too much going on, but I mean, it looks cool. There's a shoe company called Power Bottom Shoes. Also, has anyone ever noticed that like the Parthenon is just right here in Stillwater? I mean, what? How? This thing is just like parked up here on a hill. I've driven through this game so many times and just never noticed it there and never went up there to go see what on earth was that. We went up to the nuclear island area, and there's some other interesting things going on here. There's this radiation lake area, and there's a skeleton guy here. May he RIP. We also found this penthouse that's a little sketchy. It's kind of like a nuclear launch room, and there's a few things going on in here. There was a secret garden that was on top of this building downtown. We tried for a long time to find our way up to the secret garden. As it turns out, the only way you can get to it, as far as we could tell, was by flying in on it and then checking it out from there. It doesn't seem OSHA compliant though, because there should be railings and, you know, not just an open-ended area where people could just fall off. Yeah, I'm real surprised the Saints Row developers didn't think of OSHA regulations. We found this big statue over in the water, which is a reference to Alderman Hughes once again. See, he pops up everywhere. You can actually destroy the statue too, which is kind of cool. Along the way, I also found this poster for dolphin-friendly products, which I don't know why dolphins keep popping up in the Saints Row games, but here it is again. Saints Row 2 takes things to a whole nother level when it has the little like strip clubs and stuff in their red light district. I mean, they definitely don't hold back with some of the names that they picked for the names of some of the clubs around here. There's the Landing Strip Club. Wow. I found this restaurant, store, club, dance club called Baloney Curtains. Okay. There also was a chapel, and the chapel here has the little slogan, hitch 'em, ditch 'em. We help with both. So if you were ever playing Saints Row 2 and you needed help getting eloped or getting a divorce, you can go to this one place in the red light district, and it probably has strippers as well. There's other little things like peep shows and whatnot, but I found this location called Marco Porno, which I thought was a clever name, I guess. Unrelated, I was also driving around the warehouse district, and there's this little container company. They have an interesting choice of name for their company. Saints Row 2 also did have a multiplayer mode, which would be the last mainline Saints Row game to have this type of multiplayer feature that had ranked matches, player matches, and a new feature called party games, which were like non-ranked games that a host could like actually set up. There were a variety of new game types added to the game and overhauls of like the core game types from the first game, maybe to correspond with Call of Duty's popular ranking system or level up system that had like the whole longer ongoing system. They expanded their ranking system for this game beyond what it was in Saints Row 1. This time the ranks were New Jack, thug, killer, gangsta, soldier, assassin, enforcer, dominator, terminator, executioner, kingpin, and then kingpin of kingpins. There was also a multiplayer lobby that was actually really cool. It was interactive. You were in this like gym area and you could shoot some hoops, which was just kind of like a cool little add-on or a little secret area for the multiplayer side of things. There were some other things you could do, like use the pimp slap or the Vice 9. There was an alternate lobby that took place in the Saints hideout, and there were like targets you could even shoot at as well. But yeah, crazy that there was a multiplayer. Saints Row 2 would end up getting its multiplayer shut down when the GameSpy server debacle happened, something we've done a whole video on if you haven't seen it. Definitely worth checking out. But yeah, rest in peace Saints Row 2 multiplayer. And when we were looking through the random multiplayer maps that was featured in Saints Row 2, there was this island map that was kind of fun to run around on, and in the distance you can see just straight up a kraken or some sort of giant octopus just chilling out there. We tried shooting at it to see if it would do anything. It did not, but there's definitely some sort of interesting sea anomaly happening in the Saints Row universe. But I think now it's time we talk about Saints Row 3, a game that many of you guys probably clicked on this video to hear about. And there's quite a bit of things in Saints Row 3. This game saw multiple releases on the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Windows way back in 2011. It would see a Nintendo Switch release in 2019, and then it would come to Xbox One and PS4 in 2020, and Google Stadia in 2021. Now, after the release of Saints Row 2, it seemed like, in general, there was like a high turnover rate over at Volition, as by the time Saints Row 3's development started, there was maybe only 20% of the original team still working on the new Saints Row game, and this one was supposed to be bigger than ever before. And this time around, though, the game was emphasized on having it be more over the top and bigger than any other open world sandbox game that existed. This game was supposed to be massive for Saints Row as an IP, and we were getting a brand new city, Steelport, instead of Stillwater, where we were in Saints Row 1 and 2. So with a new city and a movie announced at the time that never ended up coming out, things are looking up for Saints Row 3. So when Saints Row 3 finally did release on Microsoft Windows, PS3, and Xbox 360, all the way back in 2011, it was a really, really big deal. Now, some of you might remember, after the release of Saints Row 3, publisher THQ ended up going under, and the future of Saints Row was also kind of up in the air. Ultimately, Deep Silver would end up publishing the next Saints Row game, but yeah, it wasn't like without issues. If you decide to do some extracurricular exploration near Kinsey's warehouse, you can actually find a grounded ship in a dock here. If you go and like walk around to the front of the ship, you can find 2 inflatable floaties here, and they're doing like the classic Titanic pose. Also, there's a like little penguin Easter egg that can be found on any container ship. If you look at the back of it, there'll be a little penguin that happened to have had some bad luck. Seems to be impaled here and dripping out some blood. There is an interesting reference here where you can see a homage to one of the prop artists whose last name was Payne and is referencing David Payne, the developer. He also shows up in a couple of places in Saints Row 2 as well, so it's cool just to see this Easter egg continued on here. In the campaign, there is an interesting reference that Killbane makes a reference to, where he talks about a Montreal screw job, which is a reference to the 1997 WWF Survivor Series pay-per-view event, where Bret the Hitman Hart had a prior agreement with Vince McMahon to retain his title in his hometown in his last match to the WWF before leaving for the WCW. He afterwards was furious, and he even went as far as to punch McMahon for betraying him. Also, when it comes to Saints Row the Third, it is really interesting how they did a whole like redesign for the Saints Row brand overall for like the marketing side of things. Like, you know, the logo went from looking like this in Saints Row 1 and 2 to looking like this in Saints Row the Third. But if you go to like the Saints clothing store and you look through the different clothes available, there is a logo that resembles the old school Saints Row 1 and Saints Row 2 logo with an old school 3, kind of acknowledging that this is Saints Row 3, even if, you know, things look a little different and it's just called Saints Row the Third. The game was trying to be like a soft reboot, I think, and they kept some characters and plot lines from the first 2 games, but kept it pretty loose, pretty detached, and then kind of full-sended references and old stuff when Saints Row 4 came around and got out of hell. But it was kind of interesting. I think they want Saints Row the Third to be a game that would be easy for new players to get into, but still have enough connections to the older games where long-term players would still be like, oh, yeah, I remember Shondi. She looks different. Pierce, oh my god, looks very different. But yeah, I mean, they are in the game. They're just different. But Saints Row 4 does a really good job at like bridging that gap later on, so they did come around to it. In the first hideout that you get in Saints Row the Third, there are some interesting little posters you can see around here, like gun control means do not miss. This is a gun-free zone. You better look out. Get it? Like, you can get free guns here. Beware of mom? Never mind the cat. Beware of owner. There's also some hints to aliens existing for, maybe Saints Row 4, or the DLC stuff that they did with Saints Row the Third. There's something with like alien ammunition here. There's a movie called The Urinator. Also, is this just Terminator and Eureka just here? Bears and Bullets. This park ain't no picnic. This actually is a movie that showed up in some of the older Saints Row games, but here it is in like a DVD form in Saints Row the Third, which is pretty cool. We found this, which is Jake the Snake, Robert's wrestler reference. We did find some new signs outside like this. Yes, we are open. There's a neighborhood watch with a threatening aura to it. I have a question. Is there something weird about the shape of this building to you guys, or is it just me? Has Saints Row just corrupted my mind this deep into the video already? When we were getting footage for this, we took a closer look at the prices at the sex store and the wide open 24/7 sign. There's a bathhouse advertisement over here. This store over here has no food but pets allowed. Also, we found this taco pizza ad on the ground, which maybe looks delicious. We decided to look in downtown Steelport to see what else we could find. We found a I Heart Rim Jobs sign. Bangkok is for pussies. I think Hot Topic in this universe is called Nobody Loves Me, which I'm only realizing now, which is pretty funny. And a restaurant advertisement for something called Tits and Grits. What more could you want in life? We decided to take a closer look at the cool penthouse that you take in Saints Row the Third to Power by Kanye West, and we did find some interesting things like Big Jim towels and burrito buddies. Interestingly enough, they do have a liquor license hung on the wall, which is from a city called Bridgeport. It is interesting that it's referencing a city of Bridgeport. There is like the Bridgeport area in Steelport, but it's not its own city. So I don't know, maybe when this texture was designed, Steelport was supposed to be called Bridgeport, and then they changed it to like the name of a location within the city. Look at this here. We got the Saints' first $100 bill ever. Also, the $100 bill looks interesting. Over here, there's this License to Kill CD, which is a Bond reference, I believe. As James Bond has a license to kill. Also, we found this Volition Spartan statue and these heads here. There's this Laughing Monkey whiskey brand, which is interesting. And this calendar says March 2003, which could be an old asset from way back in the day. We do know that Saints Row's earliest development started in 2003, the first Saints Row game, but we don't actually know too much as to how far along they went. I have a feeling this 2003 texture could be something left over from way back in the day. But it is cool to see that it's just randomly here in Saints Row the Third. We found this Stallion Restaurant Club and a cocktail 2 bottoms up on a building. It's like a sign. It's some sort of sex store, I think. We also found some more Volition statues. We decided to look around at some other places, like the merch inside of the Saints store. We can see like Saints Flow bobbleheads that all will fall off the shelf randomly. We have the classic Saints Row statue, which I think showed up in the older games, like in the Saints Row 2 hideout. I like how the signs in this window of a store here says, it's the state lottery. It's your chance to start over, and change is not free. When we checked out that Hot Topic equivalent store, Nobody Loves Me, there's a Dead Cow album, Proud to Eat Meat since 1921. Also, they died for our country. Apparently, Forbidden Passion is opening most places July 2nd or 3rd, but don't quote them though. Is this over here a LeBron jersey? Also, there's a random guy in the store and on TV. I noticed on this license plate, there's a reference to Saints Row 3 here. The mission Angel de la Muerte could be a reference to the movie Talladega Nights, where Ricky Bobby's father makes him train and face his fears by making him drive a car with a cougar in it. But in Saints Row, it's a tiger, which I guess could also be a reference to Scarface maybe, but I think first it's probably Talladega Nights. I guess it could be a reference to the movie The Hangover as well. I don't know. Saints Row in general has a lot of references to a ton of things, so it wouldn't be a surprise if they just took elements from a lot of sources and made their own thing. Then obviously a big part of the story in Saints Row the Third is like a big homage to the Tron movies. It makes sense because of the proximity of time with this game releasing and Tron Legacy releasing, so they had some fun with it here. Also, if you look closely at the taunts and the character creator, there are a lot of really interesting references to various different things and different media pieces. Luke noticed a lot of them were already taken directly out of like wrestling, but some of them also go beyond just like wrestling, and they go to like music artists and other things like movies and whatnot. So there's a lot of references here. If you're ever bored, take a closer look at the little taunts that are available in the Saints Row games, especially the newer ones. And when I mean newer ones, I mean Saints Row the Third and Saints Row 4 and Gat Out of Hell, not anything else. We don't talk about this one. There's Johnny Cat, which is obviously a reference to the character Johnny Gat, but he's playing the piano here. Kind of like that famous Piano Cat video from back in the day. This can be found in a monitor at Saints Row HQ. You also find it in some other locations in the game as well, but here's the main thing that you can see here. If you go to Saints headquarters, you can actually find a bunch of heads. Yeah, I don't know what's going on here. It's back here in the storage room, and yeah, why they're here, we don't know. Interestingly enough, in the remaster, these heads are more resembling that of zombies, but in the original game, they were just kind of heads. There's this random dead shark in this area. It looks like an inflatable shark maybe, but yeah, you can find it behind one of the rim jobs. There's another reference to the game Red Faction Armageddon, where the weapon Mr. Toots, it was like this crazy popular weapon. A reference to the famous weapon can be found here at Sierra Point Island in this military base where the pony logo is found here for the Steelport Brigade. Okay, so you can actually find a list of missing ships that can appear on cargo ships themselves. And if you look at the list here, some of these are a little bit more interesting. Like for instance, the Bay Chemo, I think is how it's pronounced, is like a real ship that was abandoned at sea. The story behind this ship in itself is actually really interesting. Essentially in 1914, this ship called the SS Bay Chemo was constructed, but in 1931, a trading run kind of went bad where the ship got trapped in ice. The crew abandoned ship, but then when they came back, it turned out the ship had broken free. Long story short, there were some attempts to get to the ship, but then ultimately they just didn't believe that the ship would be survivable. They thought that the ship would be broken up and would sink in a storm. And while they thought the ship sunk, it was then spotted later on, and then the crew went to find the ship, and then they thought, hey, this thing's not going to survive the winter. They retrieved some of like the valuables and they just straight up abandoned the ship. But the thing was, the Bay Chemo never actually sunk, at least not at that time. There was decades of sightings of this ship that would just be out there at sea, a ghost ship essentially, but there was never any successful attempts to salvage the ship, usually due to bad weather. The ship was sighted one final time by a group of Inuit in 1969, 38 years after it was abandoned, and that would be the last time it was ever seen. It's now presumed to have sunk, but it could still be out there. It probably sunk, but it hasn't been discovered like underwater either. There have been some efforts over the years to locate the Bay Chemo. Most notably in 2006, the Alaskan government started a project to solve the mystery of the ghost ship of the Arctic and try to locate the ship, whether still afloat or on the ocean floor, but they haven't found it just yet. It's been almost 20 years since that project has been started. The next ship listed in this Saints Row Easter egg is the HMS Seahorse 98S, which is likely a reference to the English patrol ship known as the Seahorse. The ship departed on its final patrol December 26th of 1939 during World War II, but it never ended up returning, and the status of the ship would go unknown for years. There was a lot of speculation back then as to what happened, expectation that maybe it had been mined, or at the end of World War II, records from Germany suggested that it was possible it was rammed and sunk by a German ship, but at the end of the day, no one really knows what ended up happening, just that this was the first British sub lost during World War II, and it was likely that the 39 officers on board all died alongside the ship. On a brighter note, the third ship in this list is the Axiom, which is actually a fictional ship. It's that big old spaceship that's in the movie Wall-E. Just kind of a completely different tone from the first two, right? Then next on our list, we have the USG Ishimura, which also is maybe missing. This is another fictional ship, this time time coming from the Dead Space series, which is kind of a cool little nod to that game series. Next, we have Octavius, or the Octavius, another ghost ship story based on potentially a true story here. The Octavius was an 18th century trading vessel that may have become trapped in Arctic ice. While records are kind of hard to follow exactly how this story came to be commonplace, according to legend, it was found drifting off the coast of Greenland by a crew of another ship, known as the Herald. What's interesting is that the crew that boarded the Octavius in 1775 would go on to find the entire crew frozen solid, including the captain, who was reportedly sitting at his desk with a logbook in hand mid-sentence. What's even stranger is that the people who found the ship back in the day looked at the logbook and realized that the ship likely had been lost for 13 years at the time of their discovery, preserved, but frozen. Now, of course, the story of the Octavius has elements of folklore and ghost ship legends, and there's a lot of spins and different story branches of this, that have come out of that, and there aren't any, concrete historical evidence to verify its existence, since this is something that happened in the 18th century. Still kind of a spooky tale of people finding something lost at sea. Next on our list is the Borealis, which is another fictional ship coming from the Half-Life and Portal universe. This ship was an icebreaker ship, or used as a research vessel by Aperture Science, and first appeared in Half-Life 2 Episode 2, but also had mentions in Portal 2, and maybe was supposed to have appeared in Half-Life 2 Episode 3 if that ever actually would have released. Next, there's a reference to the Heart of Gold, which is a reference to the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, the fictional spaceship from that series. Next on our list of weird ships is the Mary Celeste, which is another interesting ghost ship that's based in true real-life happenings. This ship, interestingly enough, was discovered in 1872 with no one aboard, despite the ship being in good condition and fully seaworthy. What we do know about the ship is that it was an American brigantine ship that was set to sail from New York on November 7th, 1872, bound for Italy. It was being captained by a Benjamin Briggs, a highly experienced sailor, and on board there was Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and a crew of 7, making the ship have a total of 10 people aboard. Just less than 1 month after the ship departed, though, the ship would be found adrift about 400 miles off the coast of Portugal. Still, once again, in good condition, but there was no trace of the crew. Interestingly enough, though, the lifeboat was missing, as were the ship's papers, with the exception of the captain's logbook. The cargo, which were 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol, were mostly still intact, and the logbook had the final entry of November 25th, just 9 days before the ship was found. There was still a ton of food and water on board, and a lot of the ship's personal belongings were still there, including valuables that, hadn't been taken with the crew wherever they had gone. To this day, there's no concrete answer as to what happened to the crew of the ship. There's a lot of theories out there with how they disappeared or why they had disappeared, but nothing's concrete. There's a theory that maybe there was piracy involved, but the fact that the valuables were left behind and there was, no signs of violence still on the ship made that difficult to believe. There's no evidence of some sort of mutiny that at least we could tell of. There were some theories that maybe there was fear on board that there could be an alcohol explosion and that the fumes from the alcohol could potentially cause an explosion, or at least cause the fear for an explosion, which could have led the crew to leave in a quick hurry. But there was never any burn marks discovered or any signs of a potential explosion happening, so that is kind of ruled out often. It is possible that there could have been some sort of natural disaster, like a water spout, which is like a tornado on the water, or a sudden sea quake, which could have caused panic and they all decided to jump ship thinking the ship was sinking. And then of course there's some other, theories out there that are a little less concrete, like it was an attempt for insurance fraud, or paranormal stuff could have happened, but we don't know anything about that. The ship would end up being sold eventually and would sail through and with other various owners throughout the years, and eventually it was deliberately wrecked off the coast of Haiti in an attempted insurance fraud. But yeah, to this day no one knows what happened to the crew of the ship, though technically the ship was found. Then last on this list we have the USS Snook, which was a World War II submarine for the United States that was credited with sinking over 17 ships over the course of its 9 patrols in the Pacific Theater, though the ship would end up going missing in 1945 after departing from Guam near the Ryukyu Islands east of Okinawa, Japan. The mission was to conduct surveillance and intercept Japanese shipping in preparation for the Allied invasion of Okinawa, but the last known communication of the Snook was in April of 1945 when it reported spotting an enemy convoy and preparing for an attack. After that, the submarine went silent, and while it was scheduled to rendezvous with another submarine, it failed to make contact, and despite extensive searches, they were never able to make communication or find the Snook. It's presumed that after weeks of no contact, that the Snook was presumed lost, along with its crew of 84 men. Yeah, that's the Easter egg. So, pretty cool. Now you guys know the whole backstory behind all the ships mentioned on this little piece of paper in Saints Row the Third. After the release of Saints Row 3, we get into a little bit of a more controversial era of Saints Row with the release of Saints Row 4. This game was released just 2 years after Saints Row 3, actually less than 2 years apart if you put the dates side by side. And I think it's pretty obvious why Saints Row 4 was kind of rushed compared to other Saints Row games that had more time to cook. Saints Row 4 was trying to beat the Grand Theft Auto 5 release date, which was the most anticipated game of that year, maybe decade, which came out in September of 2013. And while we've done a video in the past looking into the development woes of Saints Row 4 and how they originally had bigger ideas, things obviously had to be trimmed down and changed up dramatically to get the game ready for shipping for that early release date. And the game ended up being essentially a superhero type game taking place in the Saints Row sandbox rather than maybe a brand new experience. Now, to be fair, as a superhero game, it's kind of fun. And thematically speaking, the game did play like an over-the-top Saints Row 3 type experience, so it wasn't like the worst thing ever. And to even add some stuff to it, there were a lot of really cool Easter eggs that Saints Row 4 did that none of the other Saints Row games had ever even thought about doing something at that level. So kudos there. It is a shame though, because I do think the original idea for what Saints Row 4 could have been would have been incredible, but I think with what they had and what the execs were telling them to do, they did the best they could. Saints Row 4 does a really good job at introducing a lot of callbacks from previous Saints Row games, even some of the old games, as many of you might remember. But one thing I never actually put two and two together is that the Benjamin King at the beginning of Saints Row 4 is the Chief of Staff, which is, you know, the character from Saints Row 1, who was the leader of the Kings before getting betrayed. But alternatively, there's another interesting character that's kind of a reference within itself as a part of the main character's leadership. You might have noticed at the beginning of Saints Row 4, the Vice President of the United States is Keith David himself. You know, the famous voice actor and actor. He's voiced some iconic characters in other video game history like the Arbiter in Halo or even Sergeant Foley in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. And then of course in Saints Row 1 and Saints Row 2 he played Julius Little, who's like the main leader of the Saints and a little miniature, you know, character that we all know how that happened. What I think is really funny is that though Julius Little is obviously dead as of Saints Row 2, the character himself was iconic for Saints Row as a whole. So what better way to resurrect this character without resurrecting him than literally just putting Keith David as a character in the Saints Row universe and making him the Vice President. So now we have a character that obviously sounds like Julius, though it's just Keith David playing himself. And he's the Vice President now, and he's just like a full-on awesome character throughout Saints Row 4. And I think it's kind of a clever homage to have him appear here. There are, of course, a couple of references to the fact that Keith David sounds like Julius that pop up a couple of times in Saints Row.
I'm nothing like Julius.
There's also a funny moment that can happen in Saints Row 4 when you're in the ship and you talk to Keith about the situation of the Earth after the Earth gets, you know, straight up vaporized. Keith David has one pretty big regret.
I was 12 hours into Dead Island when the Zin attacked. Now I'll never finish. I won't forgive them for that.
It's pretty funny that Dead Island is brought up here because this is another game that was published by Deep Silver, and at this point in time, the Saints Row IP had fallen to Deep Silver. So there's a clever reference to Dead Island here. One of a few, actually. Dead Island pops up a couple of times in Saints Row 4. If you go to the Imagined as Edges plastic surgery location in Saints Row 4, you take a closer look at some of the photos on the wall, you might notice them being a little interesting. These are actually pictures from Dead Island Riptide, or at least concept arts for Dead Island Riptide, just kind of sprinkled about here. There's also another one of those Cabbit bunny cat things in this building as well. That's of course not where the references end. There's a pretty big one in Saints Row 4, which is a secret developer room, which is a little Easter egg here. If you head to the Let's Pretend store that's near Kilbane's casino and you go inside, you can see a door that says employees only. Now, if you shoot the door a few times with your pistols, the door will actually open up. Then you make your way through some hallways and you will find a full-on secret developer room, which is actually pretty cool. You can see developers' faces and stuff. There's a little shooting range. If you actually shoot the heads, they'll pop into fireworks, which is kind of cool. There's a weird inflatable toy over here on top of a toilet. You can also find this little tiny pistol, which is probably a reference to the gun from the Men in Black series that packs a pretty heavy punch, even though the gun is pretty small. It'll actually just like fling you backwards. Also, that infamous bat weapon from Saints Row the 3rd appears in Saints Row 4 as well, though it is in a hidden location. To find it, you have to find this small hole in a cave, make your way through the cave, and then there's like a, I don't know, like a little stand for this thing that we probably shouldn't show in a video. We could just have it like censored or something. But yeah, it's here and you can get the weapon here. There is a clever reference to, I guess, witches and wizards or something. Obviously, you may have heard of the Salem witch trials, which were like infamous in the United States East Coast during the 1600s over in Massachusetts. Don't know what they were doing there. But if you head to the southeastern corner of Virtual Steelport, there is like a tower in this area and you make your way to the top. The building is actually labeled straight up as Salem, and there is a broom that you can jump on and ride. What's pretty cool about this is this broom flies like a VTOL did in Saints Row 3, so you have quite a bit of control over it, surprisingly. It's pretty fun to fly around in. It did show up in Saints Row 3 Remastered, Saints Row the 3rd Remastered, but I think the Easter egg tying it to Salem is pretty clever here. Also, before we go too far away from talking about those Cabbits again, there is another reference to them in the form of graffiti that can pop up in Saints Row 4 as well, which is kind of cool. It's just graffiti, but I just want to talk about that too. You're just gonna have to trust us on this one, but there are these statues across Saints Row 4 that have these women that are like holding up an orb or something. And if you look closely, they got a 3 of something going on, which is a reference to the movie Total Recall, where that was like one of the scenes that was like iconic for that film. If you head to the Broken Shelag, I don't know how to pronounce it, there are these arcade cabinets that are in the back, and they're little homages to previous things from Saints Row history. Like, for instance, there's a Zombie Uprising 2. There's an arcade machine just straight up called Saints Row 3 with the font of Saints Row 1 and 2 and the number 3, kind of like what we talked about in Saints Row the 3rd. Just a cool little reference with like the different design on it. Also, if you head over to Kinsey's hideout and you go through the garage, you make your way up the stairs, you can get to this hallway, and if you head to the last room in the corner, there's these 3 TVs that are stacked up on top of each other, and they just kind of show off some various events that have happened in previous Saints Row games. Just kind of a fun little hidden thing here. I don't always know what's happening in some of these scenes. I think the first one is from Saints Row 1, the main character, and we have Julius and what was his name? Troy? Man, this is like a throwback to the first game. I see Gangstas in Space on the other TV, and then what is this? Let's just move on. When Luke and I were playing through Saints Row 4 to get footage of some of these Easter eggs, we did find some extra interesting things we didn't expect along the way. Like in the opening cutscene of the game, there's this very obvious Wilhelm scream. We were walking by like the TV in this like base area. We're fighting against, I think, terrorists or something. And there's this weird video being played on the TV. We weren't really sure what was going on here, but here we are. Also, I kind of am curious about how like the whole structure of Saints Row terrorism in this universe works, because they have a nice little mattress that's reserved just for the terrorist of the month, which is a crazy sentence to even say here, but here we are, Saints Row 4. They even put a picture of the terrorist of the month here, and he honestly looks like what I would expect a terrorist of the month to look like. I don't know what I expected, but this is what they put. Also, disregard the floating bottle on the table that we happen to see here. Yeah, next time you play through Saints Row 4, take a little bit of a slower pace through the beginning of the game, because there are a couple of little things that you can only see when you're playing through this area that you don't really come back and revisit later on. There's this sign on the door that says approved terrorists only. You know, they can't just let anyone be going through all these doors. And just in general, this was kind of an interesting opening level to a Saints Row game. There are some other little interesting things, like the level being called Zero Saints 30, which it just continues the long trend across the Saints Row universe of levels being references to movies and whatnot. We're not going to talk about every one in this video because we would be here literally all day. When we find out that our character has become the president of the United States somehow, there are some interesting little references that you can see during the little White House sequence, as short as the sequence in the game really is. First of all, in the White House, there is this statue, which is a reference to the OG Saints Row days. I remember this being like a big Saints Row statue back when I first played Saints Row 2, and it's kind of cool to see it pop up here in Saints Row 4 as a nice little design choice for the White House. There's a few other little references we found, like for instance on display here, you can see like the carrier from Saints Row 3. You can also see the church from Saints Row 1 and Saints Row 2. We were trying to read what the text says here. It's really, really hard to tell. It looks like it starts saying something, but then it just devolves into like the quick brown box or whatever, that little thing that people type in when they're trying to test out if their keyboards work, where it uses every letter in the sentence. We also heard this line come from a Secret Service agent where he said, "Tell my wife I had another wife."
Tell my wife I had another wife.
Obviously, the whole like romance thing added into Saints Row 4 isn't something just because they're like, ooh, new innovative feature. It was more as like a homage or a play on like the Mass Effect universe, how you can, you know, run around the ship there and romance people. You can now do that in Saints Row 4. Then obviously throughout the rest of the whole Saints Row universe and Saints Row 4, there's a lot of other little homages, especially when you're in the ship. We noticed that the ship has a lot more going on than maybe actually Virtual Steelport does. Virtual Steelport, a lot of the signages were just replaced with like very generic, like, you know, Saints Row 4 type things. But over on the other side of things, and in some of the individual levels, there are more interesting things. Saints Row 4 went above and beyond when it came to a lot of the little Easter eggs and fun homages and parodies of other things that have existed already. For instance, there's this whole section where you're in a beat-em-up game, which is called Saints of Rage, which is a clear reference to the game series Streets of Rage, and you go through and you fight some stuff. It's pretty clever, and there's a lot of homages and callbacks in here alone, like Kingdom Come Records, which was the record label Aisha had in Saints Row 1, and just the whole thing where like you had to fake your death and all that. So that was kind of cool to see here. Another big one is of course The Matrix, which is a huge part of Saints Row 4. Actually, the whole Matrix thing started out as DLC for Saints Row 3, and they decided to like run with it for the main plot of all of Saints Row 4. So that DLC never happened, but then we got to see it, you know, panned out a bit in Saints Row 4, and down to pretty much the core plot and setup is kind of an homage parody of The Matrix itself. Like for instance, they're in a virtual world of the real world, based on the real world. The real Earth's been like destroyed. Like we got a lot of Matrix references just showing up here, and they lean into it and have fun with it for sure. At the beginning of Saints Row 4, when you're still like trapped in your own little 1950s and 60s inspired world, and there's like some Fallout vibes going on, not fully, but you know what I mean. There's this whole thing where it's like Leave It to the Saints, which is a reference to Leave It to Beaver, which was a 1950s television sitcom from back in the day. I only remember watching this one 90s VHS movie that I randomly had as a kid with the same name. I guess it was supposed to be like a revival attempt or a, I don't know, like a remake. I don't remember much of the movie except the kid gets stuck in like a coffee cup at the end of the film, and that's like a whole point of the story. That's about it. I don't know. This whole segment is interesting. Shandi's making pancakes that we barely eat. There's some interesting brands and stuff that pop up that you can look at, and they're kind of unique. What I did find interesting is there's a couple of references to movies over here. They're called Funset Boulevard, A Streetcar Named Retire, The Day the Earth Stood Steady, and Dial M for Mundane, which are references to movies from the 1950s, Sunset Boulevard, A Streetcar Named Desire, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and Dial M for Murder, all released in the early 50s. At the very beginning, where you're like doing the whole thing, helping Asha out, you'll see these helicopters, and there's a homage here to the 1987 film Predator as the helicopters fly in and Long Tall Sally plays. Towards the end of the main story, there's another reference to 1980s films with the murder bots, which are pretty much, you know, an homage to the Terminator franchise. There is an interesting airplane reference to the movie Airplane, where you can find an inflatable pilot actually straight up flying our ship, which is pretty funny. In the whole segment where we're supposed to go and rescue Pierce, and he's at the old HQ in Steelport, and there's like the Saints Flow energy drink mascots running around, and then a giant Saints Flow appears, almost like the size of a, I don't know, Godzilla. This is a reference probably to like kaiju films from Japan, but also maybe a reference to Ghostbusters as it kind of is reminiscent to the whole like Stay Puffed Marshmallow Man from the Ghostbusters universe, and we get our own little homage to that here in Saints Row 4. Saints Row 4 really killed it with the little homages and references for sure. I think the character Asha, who was introduced in this game, also served as like an homage or parody of the James Bond universe. Not only is she a British secret agent and she has the codename 003, she has a mission called From Asha with Love, which is, you know, a play on the film From Russia with Love from 1963. But there are also some other little segments surrounding Asha's character that parody other secret agent stuff like the Metal Gear series. In the mission Miller Space, Kinsey will actually write something along the lines of Execute Order 66, which is obviously a reference to Star Wars, but then she also will write The Only Way to Win is to Not to Play, which is a reference to the film War Games. I'm pretty sure right before the final boss fight, there's this one shall stand, one shall fall speech. Is this a reference to Transformers? There's an item in the game called Blockhead, which I think is a reference here to Minecraft. Also, the Iron Saint suit, the name itself literally is a reference to Iron Man. At least I'm pretty sure it is. I think this character Sid might have been like an homage parody of the character Claptrap from the Borderlands universe. And last but not least, a big tie-in to kind of wrap up Saints Row 4 is that at the very ending of the game, spoiler alert, when you rip off Zinniak's head, this kind of plays out like one of those extended Mortal Kombat, you know, fatalities, and it's pretty cool. Clever way to wrap things up, other than, you know, a dance party at the end of the game. What's better than that?
Also, at the very beginning of Saints Row 4, when I was waiting for Elijah to make his character, because he always takes like 300 hours to do that, I was reading the bottom like news headlines scrolling by, and there were some funny ones that I wanted to record. I Want to Sleep with Shawnee spin-off, I Want to Hang with Pierce cancelled due to lack of contestants. September 29th named National Saints Flow Day. Aisha's second commemorative boxed set announced. Bounce Like My Cheeks dubstep remix out Tuesday. Stillwater, birthplace of the president, named #1 travel destination by the Sabbatical Channel. Stag officially disbanded. Former members now in parking enforcement. Secret Service to undergo specialized anti-gang training. Given the we faced, we have to be prepared for anything, says director Shondi. Spike in house cat attacks prompts nationwide recall of Genki Chow brand food. Autotune Stoma voice box manufacturer reports record profits. Life story of former professional wrestler Angel de la Muerte to debut on Broadway. Piledriver the musical to open next season. FDA baffled by analysis of Saints Flow ingredients. I'm not sure if tiger milk is even legal, says spokesperson. White House flags at half-mast following nationwide closure of Freckle Bitch's fast food chain.
After the release of Saints Row 4, Volition wasn't fully off the hook yet to start working on whatever else they wanted. They had more Saints Row that they were going to have to do, and Saints Row Gat Out of Hell was planned and released in 2015. And this game is a little bit interesting. It was a standalone DLC, so you could play it without having to need Saints Row 4, but it was a shorter story that focused on the character Gat and also Kinsey. I don't know why they kind of left that out of the cover, but Gat substantially, because I guess he's like the most recognizable character, and essentially builds off of the whole superhero thing they did with Saints Row 4, but takes it a step further. Instead of superhero battling, it's angelic fighting against demons. What happened to Saints Row at this point? I mean, once again, while this one might not be the best example of a Saints Row game, it still is competent enough where the game is fun, because Saints Row always kind of prioritized having fun over realism. But stylistically speaking, if you look at Saints Row 1 and you look at Saints Row Gat Out of Hell side by side, it is pretty unrecognizable. However, Saints Row Gat Out of Hell still does a good job with Easter eggs, and I'm kind of proud of Volition for at least keeping that energy alive across a game like Gat Out of Hell, which is just kind of like an out there type experience. Interestingly enough, Saints Row Gat Out of Hell does kind of serve as the final epilogue for the original Saints Row timeline. I mean, I guess you could argue that Agents of Mayhem has some connections that we will look into, but for Saints Row itself, before the whole Agents of Mayhem and Reboot era stuff happened, Gat Out of Hell was that send-off, and it is interesting how much which Gat Out of Hell will lean into its legacy as Saints Row, making a ton of references to characters from the past. Now, a lot of these maybe aren't necessarily Easter eggs, but they are very cool homages at the very least to things that only OG and long-term Saints Row fans would recognize. Towards the end of the game, there's like this shawarma cutscene where you can see this illustration of a bunch of Saints Row characters playing volleyball, and in this little image here, there's a ton of little references if you look closely. Like, for instance, a lot of characters that are dead are here. I mean, characters that technically would also be alive by Gat Out of Hell time standards are also here, but the big takeaway here is that characters we haven't seen in a long time show up here. I mean, there's Oleg, who obviously died at the beginning of Saints Row 4, and a few others from this era, but if you look closely, you can see Carlos from the beginning of Saints Row 2, and even Lynn, the first main character from the Saints to die, all the way back in Saints Row 1. I did think it was interesting also how Gat Out of Hell would kind of bring back a ton of villains from the older Saints Row games in some way or another, or at least mention them in some way. Obviously, Julius makes a return, and like I said, these are really story points, but I think for long-term Saints Row fans, these were really cool homages to have included, especially little things with like Troy randomly being a character that would show up and even be playable. He's definitely all the way down here in hell because of his whole like betrayal arc from Saints Row 1. We never really figured out who he was loyal to at the end, did we? Also, randomly, there is a Terminator reference in Gat Out of Hell where if you die in lava, Gat will go into his, like, lava death animation where he, like, you know, throws his hands up and does, like, a rock-on sign. That's cool. There are a ton of interesting details in Gat Out of Hell's world here also. A lot of plays on, like, Satan, Hell, Devil, all those types of things, obviously. But some funny references, too, along the way. I do like the recurring equivalent of Starbucks, but for the Saints Row universe ads showing up all over Hell. Like, you know, the whole like corporate analogy that's always kind of been a big antagonist in the Saints Row universe popping up again here. I found this interesting thing about like gingerbread having no soul, which I think is a reference to that old video from the earlier days of YouTube of that redhead kid who was doing the whole gingers have souls thing. Became like this whole meme for a while. South Park parodied it. So obviously putting the reference here is a play on that, but also just kind of being funny that it's like gingerbread instead. I found this graffiti here that says beware the tacos. I don't know what that means. There are some signs in Saints Row 2 that reference like Jesus loving you and whatnot, and Saints Row Gat Out of Hell does the exact opposite by having a stop praying sign, no one can hear you. There's this like arcade area that looks like it says GGG, kind of like how people say GG at the end of the game, or 666, but you know, 3 times, so it's like 666, which is like the devil, evil, hell reference. I felt like this one was a little bit clever though, but there's a comedy hour with Judas for 30 silver. I mean, we even have Torture Through the Ages, an interactive exhibit. There's this musical guest called Backdoor Action. I don't know if it's worth noting, but they're featuring an artist known as Jack Hammer. Over here, there's a mature strip club that's called Sad Cans. Then over here, you can see an ad for some television show called C-Section. A lot of ads around the place for Ice Water the Musical, and I also found signage for things like WWSD, which is a play on WWJD, which is What Would Jesus Do, but instead in this case I'm assuming it's What Would Satan Do? This is interesting. An ad for Earth's Battlefield. This motivational sign, you blew it. Just think about it. You know, I feel like this could, you know, be a little bit uplifting for some folks. I like the little forever part to it too. Now pay us tolls. It sounds accurate. The hospital here is called Our Fallen Lord Malpractice Plaza. Also, I think it's worth noting that this might be a stripper demon of some sorts. And this casino, come on now. Golden Showers Casino? Really? They just couldn't resist, could they? Here we are, aren't we? There are some other little interesting homages and references in this world that they constructed just for this standalone DLC. Kind of nice to get a breath of fresh air from Steelport, even if they have to reuse Steelport assets in a lot of cases. They did put some effort into making some unique things that I'm kind of a fan of. Some of the billboards are interesting in itself, like Demon Girls Do It Better, but you know, bring money. There's like a casino called Snowball's Chance, and has like this picture here. We found this smelting company called Deltit Smelt It Company, the ones who smelt it, which is I don't know. You know, every time I was trying to like stop and record something or get a clip of like, you know, some sort of billboard or just get a better idea of where I was, I kept getting run over by this ambulance randomly, and I was like, why is this happening to me? me. But as it turns out, the ambulances in hell aren't ambulances. They're called rambulances, and they focus on trying to run people over. It's pretty annoying, but yeah, look, it's a hell volunteer pain service. The Rambulance. Cool. There was this Get Violated ad that I was looking at. I was like, what is this? And then I saw a garbage truck drive by, and the garbage truck was dropping garbage that explodes, which is very different from real garbage men, I think, and garbage trucks here in the real world. If you look at the front of the garbage truck, it actually gives you a little interesting warning here. It says that the truck driver does not give a damn about anything. What is this taco sign here? Oh my god. You can feel it coming, the new Assquake Grande? Okay. What else do we have here in Saints Row 4? There's these stuffed animals. They've been like pierced through the chest, so that's a little bit sad. I found a taco company called Tacos Malos. Is this exclusive to Gat Out of Hell, or have I only just noticed this now? Obviously, you can find the Cabbit again inside of this little lava lake area. I also don't know if this one counts as an Easter egg or it's just something clever, but in Saints Row Gat Out of Hell, there are 7 weapons that each represent one of the 7 different deadly sins. For instance, there's an SMG called Diamond Sting, which represents the sin of greed. There's a pistol called Gallows Dodger, which represents the sin of pride. We have Gluttony, which is a special weapon. It literally shoots frosting at enemies. Yeah, it's obviously Gluttony. Then we have a weapon known as Armchair-ageddon. It's a rifle, and it's for the sin Sloth. This weapon slows movement and also kind of doubles as a minigun rocket launcher type thing. There's a shotgun called Boom Chicka, which represents the sin of lust. It causes enemies to like fall in love and temporarily be stunned as they run towards Gat. What in Pokemon Attract Attack is this? Then there is the sin Wrath, which is a launcher, and it has the special effect of sucking enemies out and spitting them out. You have to actually defeat Professor Genki to get this one. There's a sword that shoots fireballs called Uriel's Edge, which represents the sin of envy. And there we go. We have the 7 deadly sins represented here. There also is like a Gat Out of Hell phone number Easter egg that's hidden in there too that you can call and you hear the ad or whatever.
The magic, the majesty, the memories. For the first time ever, Saints Row Gat Out of Hell features original music and lyrics as well as brand new characters. You'll laugh. You'll cry. Keep holding, please. When I find love.
Kind of a weird thing, but yeah. This was like a part of like a promotional hotline that they had set up that music, old music or whatever. I don't know, just something to try to get people more interested in Saints Row Gat Out of Hell. Obviously, one of the big characters in Gat Out of Hell is Dane Vogel, who was one of the big antagonists in Saints Row 2, who comes back and had the same voice actor, which is another reference to the OG Saints Row days. Now, of course, Saints Row Gat Out of Hell had multiple different endings, but I did think it was somewhat clever how in one of the good endings you could have Gat goes to heaven and gets to be with Aisha, which is another interesting callback to the OG Saints Row timeline, where Saints Row 1, she was like a main character of the Saints. In Saints Row 2, she was there for a little bit, but she gets killed and Gat swears for her revenge. So at least they finally came full circle with tying up this storyline. In another ending, we see a lot of the characters being banished back to the mortal realm, but Johnny Gat gets detained by God. And God, of course, who could voice God other than the Nathan Fillion? Of course, Nathan Fillion as God then gives Johnny Gat a couple of options, which then choose essentially the ending for Saints Row, and interestingly enough, one of the endings does turn out to be somewhat canon, as there is the whole retcon the universe and everything that's happened to Saints Row, which essentially recreates a new Earth and leads to the setup of Agents of Mayhem, which is a spin-off of the Saints Row universe, and is definitely something quite a bit different, and we'll see characters reappear in different ways. Johnny Gat being a lieutenant in the Seoul police force in South Korea or whatever. Nonetheless, this will lead us into what's going on with Agents of Mayhem, and there's a lot of references in Agents of Mayhem, and Luke decided to dedicate his time for this video playing that game, so you know, hearts go out to Luke for struggling through having to play a bunch of Agents of Mayhem. It's not that bad of a game, but he had to play through the game that didn't sell very well at all. So let's talk about this game first, and then Luke's gonna take you guys into some of the Easter eggs hidden here. Okay, now we will talk about the Saints Row reboot. Don't you worry. I know you guys are loving that game and want to talk about that. But before we get to that, we should talk about Agents of Mayhem. Even though it's, on the fence as to whether or not this counts as a Saints Row game, it takes place in a parallel universe to Saints Row. So maybe we should mention it. In the past, we've misspoken thinking that this was a multiplayer game, and I genuinely thought it was a multiplayer game because I hadn't really played it beyond just a couple of minutes when I randomly tried it out, and I thought I was like in the tutorial or something. This game was not very popular. It was a commercial disappointment. It led to a ton of layoffs at Volition, but they wanted to kind of have it cross over with the Saints Row series a bit more because Saints Row was obviously more popular than Agents of Mayhem ended up being. Ultimately, the game ended up landing around like the 6 to 7 out of 10 range, if, the review range was being nice. Otherwise, it got some 5 out of 10s.
So yeah, I was tasked with playing Agents of Mayhem for a little bit, and I mean, it's okay. It's not as bad as I expected it to be. I hadn't played it ever, or maybe I played it back in the day, I can't even remember. But I mean, the gameplay is fine, the story is kind of weird, and I mean, I don't know, I don't really care about any of these characters, which that's a big issue, I guess, if you're trying to tell a story. Nonetheless, there's still some care that was put into this game, and there's some charming Easter eggs you can find. Like, for example, when you get to the Ark, you can find the lab, and if you take a closer look at the front desk, you can see this Half-Life reference, and there's a little poster that says, "Gordon, please return my crowbar," and it has a picture of the classic Half-Life crowbar. That isn't actually the only Valve Easter egg in this game. There's this technology called Kremlin Tech that you can craft, and there's a moonbeam that you can use. And the description reads, "Agent can charge up and call down a tactical laser from space," which is a reference to the end of Portal 2, spoiler alert I guess, where the Space Corps can be seen floating in the darkness and he just screams, "Space!" Also, there's a side quest called Operation Street Fight, and the intro graphic for it has Braddock and Hauser on like a versus screen with a blue background, which is what the classic Street Fighter game would do. There's also a reference to the '79 film Apocalypse Now, with one of the core upgrades for Braddock being called Apocalypse Now. The quote on the upgrade actually even says "smells like victory," which is a famous line from the movie, where he's like, "You know that gasoline smell on the hill? It smells like victory." I don't know, I haven't seen the movie in a long time, but it's something like that. There's also a gadget that references Red Dead Redemption, with it being called Dead Met Redemption. Now, this game came out in 2017, and for some reason, there's a reference to Gangnam Style from 2012 in this, so I don't know, this seems a little out of touch for 5 years later, but I mean, it's still kind of funny. You can find this random lady just dancing the Gangnam Style in the back of this truck here. They did have stuff like this in the old Saints Row games too, like, pedestrians would just randomly do a Michael Jackson dance routine. So it actually is kind of a nice Easter egg the more I think about it. Also, throughout the campaign, the agents will mention different social media platforms they use, like FaceSpace, which is Facebook and MySpace, or Instablam, which is Instagram. If you go back to the Ark, you can actually find this little Easter egg behind the lab, where you interact with this pipe here, and vintage cartoon mode will turn on. Everyone will start like bopping up and down and, swinging to the old-timey music, and it's very reminiscent of like the old Mickey Mouse cartoons. Now, there's actually 3 characters from Saints Row that reappear. There's obviously Johnny Gat, who's called Gat in the game, but there's also Kingpin, who's Pierce, and Yeti, who's Oleg. So it's kind of cool to at least have some characters come back, since this is like an alternate timeline, I guess, or I don't even know with the ending of Get Out of Hell what they were trying to do here. But I think since Johnny Gat is a cop, that must be that timeline, because at the end of that one ending where he retcons everything, or where he asks God to retcon everything, he becomes a cop. So I guess this is that timeline? I don't know. I guess I'm just confused. Also, if you look at the logo for the Mayhem agency, you can kind of see how it resembles the classic Saints Row symbol, and it just looks like a futuristic version of that. When you meet Kingpin, who's Pierce for the first time, you can see in his cutscene that he is unifying all the gangs of Stillwater, which obviously is the location from the first 2 Saints Row games. You can also see the West Side Rollers, the Vice Kings, and the Los Carnolos gangs, including characters like Ben King, Anthony Green, Angelo Lopez, Freckleby, Joseph Bryce, and Tanya. Also, if you remember back to Saints Row 3, and I think we showed a cutscene like that earlier, Oleg and Pierce were playing chess constantly throughout the game. I think there's multiple cutscenes of them playing chess together. And in this game, Yeti and Kingpin, who are Oleg and Pierce, they're playing chess again together. Now, earlier we talked about the ending from Get Out of Hell where he reunites with Aisha, which obviously didn't happen in this timeline. If this is a timeline, I'm still very confused on that. Nonetheless, if you play as Get during the mission Press X to object, there's actually a reference to Aisha when Johnny Get says, "I vaguely recall dating an Aisha. Maybe in a different life." The main antagonist of Agents of Mayhem is also Morningstar, which is a gang from 3 and 4. There's also another callback to Saints Row 2 with the truck called Lower Dust, which is what the Samedi were distributing, and it's mentioned in a mission.
Lower Dust.
Yes, hidden in street food.
During Daisy's intro cutscene, you can see the Ronin gang from Saints Row 2. There's also a cutscene where Kenzie Kensington is revealed to be the character's safe word, which obviously is Kenzie from Saints Row the 3rd and 4th. Furthermore, you can actually see a reference to that Get Out of Hell cutscene at the end, so I guess this is the same universe, where there's like this file that mentions Johnny Gat and Kenzie interrogating someone, and that's at the end of Get Out of Hell. Also, that angel statue from Saints Row 2 that was in many of the games is also in this game. You can find it here in the Ark at the back of the relic shop. You can also find a flyer for the Stillwater Sharks, which were a popular team back when you were still playing in Stillwater. There's also this memorial for agents who died, I guess, and a bunch of the names are developer names, and some of the names are even references to other Saints Row characters. You can also find the devil from Get Out of Hell on the side of this truck. There's also this heart graffiti with the name Emily in it that people have found, and I do wonder if someone who had worked on the game put their partner's name in this. You can also find this memorial with the original Saints Row logo in the Ark, and this building is called Seoncto Row, which I think Seoncto means saint, so this is Saints Row. Also, you can find this box that has the XS2 Ultimax shotgun from Saints Row 2 on it. The character Hardtech has this harpoon ability, and the description says "get over here," which is a reference to Mortal Kombat. And also you can find the Scott Jason building, and Scott Jason is a designer that worked on Agents of Mayhem. Also, you can find an Ultor building, which I wonder what they are up to nowadays. With Agents of Mayhem introducing different characters that you could switch to, they also introduced character skins. And a lot of these skins are references to other franchises from movies and television and the like. So I'm just gonna try to go through all of them real quick because I think they're kind of cool. First off, for Johnny Gat, you got a Saints Row 4 inspired one, you got a Magnum PI inspired one, and you got Sonny Crockett from Miami Vice, where part of the skin is even called Johnny Crockett. Then for Braddock, you got Bishop from the X-Men, with part of the skin actually being called Cable Layer, which is another reference to an X-Men character. And also you got Marvel's Winter Soldier / Bucky Barnes represented with this skin. For Daisy, you have a Wonder Woman skin and a Hellboy skin. Hollywood can be dressed up as Captain America, Iron Man, and a Saints Row 1 inspired skin. Then for Hardtrack, you got a Bruce Lee inspired skin from the movie The Game of Death, where he's in his famous yellow and black suit, which is probably his most famous outfit. Then Jewel can be dressed up as Barbie, the Super Mario Brothers, and Harley Quinn. Lazarus has two X-Men inspired skin, one being Mystique and the other one being Dazzler, but also a Titan from Attack on Titan and Vision from the Avengers. Oni has a Joker inspired skin, and Redcard has a G.I. Joe inspired skin and a Transformers inspired skin, specifically Bumblebee. Rama can be dressed up as Hawkeye, Green Arrow, and Storm from the X-Men. Safe word can be Kim Possible, Rogue from the X-Men, Robin from The Dark Knight Returns, and Trinity from The Matrix. Shahrazad, I'm not even sure how to pronounce that name, but they can be dressed up as Sub-Zero. And lastly, the character Yeti can be dressed up as the Incredible Hulk, Pantro from the Thundercats, or Colossus from the X-Men.
This leads us into the era of 2019, where after a break from Saints Row, THQ Nordic announced that Volition was developing a full entry in the Saints Row series, which would be revealed to be a reboot to Saints Row. And when the game was first revealed in 2021, the opinions from the fan base was definitely mixed, as the game seemed very, very different from how fans had remembered Saints Row to be. Just thematically different, the whole vibe felt very different. But still, hey, it was a co-op game. Co-op games are kind of far and few between. People were willing to give the game a shot. I was willing to give the game a shot. So it released. It wasn't received well. It was a commercial failure, ultimately leading to the development studio, Volition, finally closing down after years, which is a big RIP to the Saints Row series. But there are some Easter eggs in Saints Row 2022. So maybe as a respect to that studio and those people that had worked on a game that ultimately was a failure, probably not because of the groundwork developed developers just trying their best to make a good game, but probably some decisions from the top down. Out of respect for those people who have committed time into any Saints Row game, I think we should still give Saints Row 2022 the same look at all of the Easter eggs like we did with the previous Saints Row games, and kind of send that game off in a cooler swan song than the story it actually got in Saints Row 2022. At the beginning of the Saints Row reboot, there is this sign that says playa, like head to the beach in Spanish essentially, but the way that it's spelled also could be insinuated or read as playa, which is what you were referred to as in Saints Row 1 and in Saints Row 2, or parts of Saints Row 2. Playa. Not an Easter egg, but on 2 separate occasions, I found someone just like floating over here. We saw a movie poster for something called Shotgun Chimp 2, which, I mean, that looks pretty metal. Okay. The woke media has gotten to Saints Row Reboot. You know, say what you will about the cringy story about how we're playing as a gangster who's worried about his student loans for some reason.
I don't have to love it, I have to pay my student loans.
Amen.
But I draw the line when they rename Freckle Bitches to FBs. Oh, here's a poster of Nightblade, which is that character from Saints Row 3, a fictional character, but he's like played by the other character. You guys know how it is. There's also another thing for Metal Fury. Looks cool. We found this dedication to some guy named Watson. It's Watson Tower on the back. It says friend, gentleman, saint, idol, and ninja. Pretty cool. Also found in this Saints Row reboot, if you look closely inside of the vault, there's a lot of interesting references going on here. Firstly, if you look at the names that are on some of these little security lockers, you see that the names are, I don't know, just some really basic jokes, I guess. You know, third grade humor. But nonetheless, you look around some more, there are some interesting references to the greater Saints Row universe. There's a Johnny Gat bobblehead, which does bring into question like the aspects of the larger lore that's going on in this Saints Row game. If you look over here, you can see Professor Genki. We have a cutout of Killbane, and there's some magazines referencing Gangstas in Space, which was the whole movie. There is some speculation that this leads some people to believe that in this universe where the reboot series takes place, Saints Row 1, 2, and the 3rd are canon. However, because of Gat Out of Hell, Saints Row 4 and Gat Out of Hell were retconned and never actually occurred, which is an interesting theory to say the least, but I mean, we don't really know. And the chances of us getting another Saints Row game in the near future that would possibly, you know, clear some things up, tie some things up, maybe explain some things or bring back some beloved characters is probably really low. So unfortunately, we just have this stuff to speculate before, you know, Volition ended up shutting down altogether. Also in the Saints Row reboot, I found this area, this bar called the Mad Cow. Very clever. Finally, after looking for how this game's supposed to recreate Las Vegas, I did find the El Dorado neighborhood, which was supposedly like the big area that's a recreation parody of the Las Vegas Strip. And I can kind of see how, I guess. Like, for instance, if you look at this pyramid-shaped building called the Aztec. This is a clear like parody homage of the real world Luxor Hotel and Casino. Across from it is the Lancelot, which is a play on the Excalibur Hotel, which also is across the street from the Luxor. Over here you can see a hot air balloon that resembles the Paris hot air balloon from the Paris Hotel on the Strip. There's the Poseidon Palace, which I think is probably a play on Treasure Island. There's this thing that very clearly looks like the Stratosphere, and then there's a Ballyhoo, which is a reference probably to Bally's Las Vegas. On the flip side of things, I found this other hotel that offers a free hotel room as long as you pay $75 for Wi-Fi, which does feel like a deal. Then on the other hand, I found this smaller location called Willie's. The sign's pretty interesting. And then of course I was listening to the radio and I heard an interesting advertisement for something called Red Faction Brewery.
That was 9 Train by Steam Wagon Wilson.
So, what can I get you? I'll have the Crazy Parker IPA.
Geomod Doppelbock for me, please. I want a Nano Forge Oatmeal Stout.
At Red Faction Brewery, we terraform quality ingredients into a revolution of flavor.
Okay, so then if you head over to Idol's territory and you kind of go up to this like wall looking thing, you can see there's like some stuff that's been patched up maybe here. And if you actually hit it and break it open, you look inside and you can see one what on earth actually going on here? Are these Minecraft characters or a reference to Minecraft? I don't know. I don't know if I want anything to do with it. Also, in Saints Row, you can find a weird sign over here. I mean, it's not that weird of a sign unless you look closely at it and you start to think about the overall general arcing context, but the sign itself doesn't make much sense. It says, "Vote Richard Hughes for Alderman." Why is this an Easter egg? If you are like a very hardcore Saints Row fan, you might already know, but the character Richard Hughes, who also had the alias Alderman Hughes because he was the alderman character, which an alderman is like a member of a municipal assembly, and Richard Hughes was the alderman of Stillwater in Saints Row 1, and he was running for mayor. He's kind of a character that's in the background and is talked about a lot, but you don't really see him in the main story until the very end of the game. Now, some of you might know how Saints Row 1 ends in a pretty big explosion, and that yacht that explodes was Richard Hughes' yacht. And Richard Hughes is seen only in this last ending mission of the game. He dies on that yacht, which we find out in Saints Row 2. This character's like influence on Saints Row exists more than just the one time in Saints Row 1. He was a pretty corrupt politician, so don't feel too bad for him, but in Saints Row 2, his widow, Monica, goes on to successfully run for mayor. And by Saints Row the Third, Monica Hughes is a U.S. senator. There's a bridge that's built in Stillwater, which is a tribute to her husband, called the Hughes Memorial Bridge, which ends up getting destroyed. And she was a bit salty about that, so she ends up using her influence to create Stag, which is like another antagonistic force you have to face off against in Saints Row the Third. There's even special audio logs you can find in Saints Row 4 that talk about Richard Hughes, and apparently Tanya Winters suggests that she might have been doing some stuff behind the scenes with Richard Hughes back in the day, and she even cracks some jokes about this character's death. So it is interesting. They even had a statue for this character in Saints Row, but later on, if you think about the overall influence here, since Stag was formed by Monica Hughes out of outrage for the Hughes Memorial Bridge being destroyed, and then Stag were the people who were launching that nuclear missile that the player character goes and defuses at the beginning of Saints Row 4, which then leads to the player becoming the president of the United States. In one way or another, it always comes back to Hughes being behind major plot points in Saints Row, and it's interesting just to see the sign show up in the new Saints Row reboot that just rebooted one game and never will have a sequel. I don't know, I'm looking at a picture of the character right now, and would you ever think this guy would end up being the most influential character in the Saints Row universe? There's also a pretty cringy campaign level in Saints Row, the reboot, where you're like LARPing and you're like going around doing LARPing stuff. But you can find this treasure chest, and inside the treasure chest, there are a bunch of bottle caps. And the hero character is like, oh, what's the point of this? And what it really is a clever homage to the Fallout series, which uses bottle caps as its main form of currency. So a little bit of a redeeming thing on an otherwise, I don't know, not that impressive level. There's also another chest that's labeled Mimic that you're supposedly not supposed to touch. What I find really interesting about this Mimic chest is that that's probably a reference to like the Dark Souls or Elden Ring type games where you can, use mimics and whatnot. It gives you a bit of an advantage. It helps you out in some fierce times, but there is like this kind of highbrow gatekeeping type behavior sometimes associated with parts of the Dark Souls community, where some people like despise mimics and think that if you play with mimics you are cheating and you're not playing the game correctly. That's not really the debate I'm looking to get into. However, putting a mimic chest here and then like yelling at the player not to go near it, I think is actually pretty clever. Also, if you head all the way out in the county in this game and you just like wander around the desert for a bit, you might run into what appears to be a hammer in a rock, which is obviously a clever homage to Thor's hammer, as in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, this is how Thor's hammer made its way to Earth and how like that whole story went. The first Thor movie, by the way, really weird movie to watch all these years later. If you haven't seen Thor in years, the first one, I don't know. It was a wild ride. I don't know if it was as good as I remembered it being originally, but it kind of in a bad good way. I'm getting a little off track, but yeah, here it is in Saints Row. There's actually a really weird and random monolith just kind of out there in Saints Row. Like, I don't know, it's just here in this like canyony looking desert area. There's a lot going on with it, and the monolith itself is likely a reference to the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. At the very beginning of the film, they show a monolith and it's like, oh, look at humanity. It's like some deeper conversation piece that people still talk about and debate what the monolith actually means to this day. But here it is in Saints Row. But the other weird thing is that on this monolith, there is what seems to be some sort of riddle. Find the fork along the road north swing left from the twin bricks, jump once. If you jump twice, you've gone too far. Broken wagon is right. Down you go. Once you crest and Santo Ileso is in view, right on the main, wrap around the border, take a left, follow the dirt north into the canyon, stay left and howl at the moon twice. After you tinkle, you'll find a shack. Wait till sundown, bring a bat, wear something pink, don't forget $20. Okay. So a bunch of people have tried and attempted to put together the pieces of the Easter egg, and the long of the short is, the short of the long is, what is the right way to say that? Boom! An alien ship, a UFO. At least I think that that's the riddle Easter egg. Maybe there's more to it that we haven't figured out yet, but still kind of a cool little hidden thing. If you look hard enough, you can also find a singing bush. Yeah, I don't know, it's just a bush singing. Listen to this.
She'll be coming round the mountain when she comes.
This could be a reference to the movie Three Amigos. I don't know if it is, but let me know what you think it is. There also are occasionally dumpsters that glow, and I think there's like a little clever reference to The Legend of Zelda, specifically Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, when you would find a chest and, you know, you would open it and it would give you a little animation, and then you'd hold it up in the air and it was like, I got a thing. It's like that, but, you know, Saints Row-ified. There's a ton of other references in the Saints Row game. There's this Zohar reference from the Xeno series. If you've played too many hours of Halo 3 custom games, you might recognize this game, but if you fly way out in the desert again, there's a weird structure over here, and it is what appears to be a Jenga tower. I mean, it's not exactly a Jenga tower, but it's a play on Jenga, but like the actual Jenga game, not Halo, obviously. Interestingly enough, though, it is destructible, so you can actually play Jenga with it, which I think is a cool little thing that they did. Okay, so I've only ever seen like 2 episodes of Doctor Who. I never could just get into it as much as I wanted to and heard good things about it. I remember like back in 2013, though, it was like the cool thing to nerd out over Doctor Who, so that's when I tried it, and maybe it was just a bad time to try to get into the series. But nonetheless, there is a reference to Doctor Who in Saints Row with a phone booth machine, a TARDIS, but it's called a TARDIS in this because, you know, they're trying to be funny. Also out in the wilderness, like this is Red Dead, it seems like, where all the Easter eggs are. There's a bunch of inflatable dolls out here, except they're clothed, interestingly enough, but a bit gassy or deflating maybe. There's also a crashed UFO out there that's not the same one that's like being uncovered in that cave we talked about earlier. Just another little random thing that you can find out in the wilderness of Saints Row. And turns out there's another UFO that's like crashed in the water here. Oh, what the is this? Okay, so over by the sewers down here, there's a red balloon just chilling in there, which is from the It series of movies, or the It book, or the original It movie. There's a giant comb with some dude here, which is a reference to Spaceballs. So usually in most Saints Row games, if you want a vehicle that has NOS in it, you have to go and upgrade it at like, you know, a place you can fix it up, like rim jobs or something. And in this Saints Row game, there is one vehicle that already has the NOS built in. It's this like green sports car, which is actually a reference from Fast and Furious. I didn't realize that until I saw this in a video by YouTuber Jakey D, so thank you. But it gets wilder. This car also has an ejector seat. Okay, I don't remember that from the Fast and Furious movie, but I also haven't seen a Fast and Furious movie in quite some time. Is this a reference to Fast and Furious here, or is this more a reference to the old Bond movie that had the ejector seat in it? There are some other interesting vehicles though. There's a clown car, there's a bathtub car, and a go-kart. Have you ever played the arcade game Streets of Rage? Well, there is a full little mini arcade game in this Saints Row game called Saints of Rage that you can actually play fully in this game. It's like a little fun experience to kill a few minutes. But hey, you get to play as Johnny Gat once again, which, I mean, this is cool. We haven't gotten to play as him since Gat Out of Hell. This also usually is paired with another arcade machine called Zombie Uprising, which is a reference to the zombie survival game from Saints Row 2 that you could play inside of your crib. It'd be like a little zombie game. It was actually really hard to play, and it wasn't maybe the most fleshed out experience, but still a cool bonus. Paved the way for zombies to eventually appear in Saints Row the Third, and that one was pretty cool. Over in Memorial Park, you can find a sign here called Red Faction Brew Works, which by now I'm sure you guys know what this is from. Probably a reference to the Red Faction games, since we've already talked about other crossovers at this point in the video. Kind of a neat little thing. It's interesting. I mean, they had Red Faction stuff in Saints Row 2, so cool to see it still being continued here. You can find the car from the movie National Lampoon's Vacation just broken down out here. Kind of a little clever thing to put here. Another Easter egg I found from that Jakey D video. Apparently, if you see this graffiti that's kind of pointing over here, you can find like an opening with some rocks circled around here and a little gate fence covering it, and if you look in, what is that? I want nothing to do with it, but I'm also kind of intrigued. I wish I knew what was going on here. I wish this was more of the story of Saints Row than the story we got with Saints Row. If you travel over to Rapid Go Groceries, you can find a sign covering one of the doorways saying, "I assure you we are open," which is a little homage and reference to the 1994 film Clerks. Okay, so there's something kind of a little bit elaborate that was likely only included in the game for people who are going to hack the game, or people on like PC who are like modding the game and whatnot. So I still think this is an Easter egg because it obviously was intended to be found, even though without like, you know, messing with the game files and stuff, you may not actually find this one. I don't know, maybe if you look really closely you can find it. But there is a Money Shot magazine that is like a lewd magazine, but it has a picture of Shondi from Saints Row 2 on the cover of it. On the flip side of the magazine, there's some other advertisements that are a little, you know, sus, but in the corner here you can see there's one that says literally serious, did you hack, I'm assuming, the game, which is kind of funny. And then right below that it's like naughty and you're something fake classified or something. Nothing to see here, you know, besides the interesting things to see in the magazine. Okay, so this is kind of funny. In the original Saints Row games like Saints Row 2, there was the car place called Rim Jobs, and you know, a little bit of a lewd name, but kind of a funny, you know, double entendre. In this game, you know, they had to clean it up a bit. So the car mechanic place is called Jim Robs, which is totally different and, you know, not the same exact joke, but slightly different. You even get an opportunity to meet the Jim Rob himself. Can you believe it? On the radio in this game, you also can occasionally hear references to other things from the Saints universe, like Stillwater will be mentioned at a time. You also can see a billboard in this Saints Row game advertising Legal Lee if you need some legal help. This is the lawyer that the Saints use throughout multiple Saints games, and he was the lawyer that showed up to help Gat in court in Saints Row 2, you know, before that whole thing went south. You can also find a special payphone hidden out and about that may slightly resemble the payphone from the movie Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, you know, like the time-traveling payphone thing that starred Alex Winter and Keanu Reeves. There's also a secret location where you can find Friday the 13th's Jason Voorhees and The Silence of the Lambs Hannibal Lecter, but in a blow-up doll form. They're just chilling, maybe drinking a little bit, hanging out here. Kind of cute. There's one of those things that are like sewer lids. What are these things called? Luke, record a face cam line with what they're called.
Manhole covers.
But there's turtles crawling out of them, which is a reference to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I think. I mean, I'm definitely positive. They even have like the little headbands on. But this is before, I guess, they mutated and became teenagers. And this isn't really an Easter egg, but there is an alternate ending for those who did 100% completion of this game. And man, good for you if you went through all that and then, you know, did that to yourself. But you get a little karaoke version of the characters singing the B-52 song Love Shack. Why did they cater this game for Gen Zers? And that is it. We managed to cover every single Saints Row Easter egg. What a journey this video has been. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on so you can see more videos like this. We have a ton of long form content if you've watched this far, so we could be your favorite channel to put on in the background or put on when you're watching on TV. If you're watching on the TV, double check to make sure you're subscribed. I know it takes 2 extra seconds, but it'll be worth it because then you'll get stuff like this recommended more frequently. And otherwise, thanks so much. Huge shout out to our patrons making this type of stuff possible. If you guys want to throw a few dollars our way so that we can continue to make long form content, Patreon is in the link down below. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time with a new video.